I apologized for the appearance of my daughter-in-law, which my mother-in-law found displeasing. During my father-in-law's 60th birthday celebration, she reprimanded me in front of our relatives, lamenting not just her lack of attractiveness, but also her perceived incompetence. It was truly humiliating. I found myself wondering where my usually supportive husband was during this ordeal. Was he occupied with our daughter? His absence was conspicuous. Upon my arrival at my in-laws' home, feeling ready to enjoy the festivities, my mother-in-law suddenly complained of chronic back pain, rendering her unable to participate. Consequently, she entrusted all party preparations to me. As the event progressed, she continued to denigrate me in front of our gathered relatives, casting a shadow over what should have been a joyous occasion. It felt as though the lively atmosphere had turned somber, resembling more of a funeral than a celebration. Then, breaking the uncomfortable silence, my father-in-law stood up. "Is that all you have to say?" Little did anyone know, this seemingly innocuous question would set off a chain of events beyond imagination. My name is Sarah, and I'm 35 years old. 6 years ago, I tied the knot with Michael, my husband, who happened to be 3 years my junior. Together, we have a delightful 5-year-old daughter. However, despite the joy of our family, there was always a shadow lurking in the form of my mother-in-law's disapproval. She harbored resentment towards me for being older than her son. Every holiday visit, be it New Year's, Memorial Day, or any national celebration, was tainted by her cutting remarks aimed at me, often in the absence of my husband. "I wish I had a younger, livelier, and more attractive daughter-in-law, not someone adorned with age spots like you," she would say with a sharp tongue. "Do I really look that old?" "Yes, very much so. Haven't you noticed your own reflection in the mirror every day?" Receiving criticism about one's appearance can be deeply hurtful, especially for women. Despite this, I tried to brush it off, considering our limited interactions occurring only a few times a year. However, instead of diffusing the situation, my nonchalant response seemed to further provoke her. "You're remarkably thick-skinned for a woman of your age. It's irritating how you remain unaffected by my words. You lack even a trace of humility," she continued, her words growing harsher with each exchange. Yeah," was all I could muster in response. How should I confront my mother-in-law, whose words always leave me speechless? In front of my husband, she wears a facade of kindness, concealing her true nature. It's as if he's oblivious to her mistreatment of me. Yet, if I were to express my frustrations, I fear I'd bear the blame. So, I've endured in silence. Visiting their home with her presence feels like carrying a heavy burden. Despite this, it was a significant occasion, my gentle father-in-law's 60th birthday celebration. With numerous relatives gathering for the grand event, I chose to attend. Though my father-in-law is reserved, his subtle acts of kindness envelop me when my mother-in-law's hurtful words weigh me down. He gently approaches, offering solace with his words. "Sarah, if you're struggling, please don't hesitate to confide in me. I'd like to offer my support if that's all right with you." I couldn't help but wonder if my father-in-law was aware of the harassment I endured from my mother-in-law. Perhaps he chose to refrain from openly supporting me to shield me from further mistreatment behind the scenes. To honor our compassionate father-in-law, our family embarked on a 3-hour journey early in the morning to reach our in-laws' home. Feeling a bit under the weather with a low-grade fever and lingering fatigue, I entrusted the driving to my husband, Michael. Upon arrival, my mother-in-law emerged from the front door with an air of cheerfulness. Well, look who's here. It's been a while, Michael. You should visit more often. Oh dear, you look exhausted." "I've been driving non-stop, so it's understandable," Michael replied wearily. "You've clearly put in a lot of effort. I'll prepare the bed right away. Why don't you go rest in the back room?" "That sounds like a plan, Sarah. You should rest too. You've been tending to our child in the car. You must be exhausted. Plus, you don't seem well." "Oh, Michael, you didn't know. I spoke with Sarah yesterday, and we arranged to go shopping for the 60th birthday celebration." "Sarah, you go rest. Once you've placed the luggage at the entrance, we'll head out." Of course, I couldn't recall any such arrangement, nor did I recall discussing any shopping plans. After looking after our energetic 5-year-old daughter, I felt drained. Since I wasn't feeling well, I welcomed the chance to rest. Since Sarah isn't feeling well, let her rest. You can handle the shopping, but this is your father's special occasion. I want to pick out the finest ingredients with Sarah. Sarah, you'll stick to our plan, won't you? She had a knack for presenting excuses that left me no room for refusal. After dropping off the luggage, she grabbed my arm forcefully and directed me back into the car we had just exited. With an intense glare, she snapped, "You don't need rest right now." But almost instantly, her demeanor softened into a broad smile as she exclaimed, "Thank you for driving this. I really appreciate it." Knowing my mother-in-law's temperament, opposing her at that moment would likely ruin the entire day. With reluctance, I found myself settling into the driver's seat. "I'm feeling all right, Michael. You take a break. I'll accompany mother-in-law for shopping." Attempting to hand her daughter over to Michael, my mother-in-law swiftly intervened, taking the child from my arms and settling her into the child's seat before shutting the door firmly. Taking care of the child is a mother's responsibility. "Well then, Michael, we're off." As she settled into the passenger seat, her previously sweet demeanor vanished, replaced by a harsh tone as she began to chastise me. "So, you can't even manage to care for your own child? Quit relying on Michael for everything. You're nothing but an incompetent daughter-in-law, aging before your time." What was truly unsettling was her ability to maintain a sugary facade while my husband, Michael, remained within earshot, completely oblivious. "Wave goodbye to this microwave," she quipped as we embarked on the drive in my husband's unfamiliar car towards the bustling supermarket. Predictably, my mother-in-law wasted no time before launching into a lecture. "You'll regret lounging around while my son drives, mother-in-law," I retorted weakly. "Please refrain from such ominous remarks. I've been battling fever and fatigue since this morning. Your poor health stems from your lack of discipline, and your crow's feet, more pronounced. Those cheek spots, darker. It's painful to witness. Your skin has lost its former vitality," she criticized relentlessly. Drained of all energy to counter her harsh words, I merely nodded as we reached the supermarket. This is utterly exhausting. How do daughters-in-law worldwide endure such treatment from their mothers-in-law? My spirited mother-in-law sprang out of the car without a word of gratitude, immediately thrusting 2 shopping carts into my hands. "Move faster, you're so slow." Attempting to steer clear of the bustling crowds, I lagged behind, but she surged ahead, filling the carts with extravagant items like USDA prime beef, crab, salmon roe, and melons. She then proceeded to toss in unnecessary items. "Mother-in-law, do we really need all of this right now? I've already decided. We're stocking up so we won't have to make frequent trips. You should have known that without my having to tell you." Feeling utterly helpless, I allowed her to dictate the shopping list. By the time we finished, the carts were overflowing. "Let's head to checkout. Move quickly now. No dawdling." Despite her haste, when it was time to settle the bill at the checkout counter, my mother-in-law made no move to retrieve her wallet. "Mother-in-law, the payment," I ventured. She kept her hands folded behind her back, unmoving. When I pressed her again for the money, she shot me an angry glare. "You should foot the bill for everything." "Excuse me," I stammered. "As a wife, it's your responsibility to cater to your husband's family. Don't be miserly, just pay up." Reluctantly, I ended up covering the entire bill at the register, totaling $300. With no cash on hand, I had to charge it to my credit card. As a part-time worker trying to support my child, this financial blow hit hard. What made matters worse was that I had brought $300 as a birthday gift for my father-in-law's 60th birthday, but now I couldn't use it. This expense meant tightening our belts even further in the future, adding to the already heavy burden. I wonder how I'll break this news to Michael. If I were to speak up about this treatment, my mother-in-law might cause a scene. During the car ride home, she continued her onslaught of insults, showcasing an impressive array of verbal attacks. On our arrival home, my husband remained fast asleep, likely exhausted. Sensing an opportunity, my mother-in-law's smile widened as she began to assert her authority over me. "After you've put away the groceries, go eat in the garden immediately. Could I please have a moment to rest? You have no right to defy your mother-in-law. This is the consequence of letting Michael drive alone. You brought this upon yourself," I muttered. "If you have time to argue, then you have time to work. Hurry up, we're running out of time. After you've eaten, clean the bathroom and the toilet." Despite the injustice of the situation, I had no option but to endure it. Throughout the day, I toiled in the garden, pulling out weeds before tackling the grime and yellow stains in the bathroom and toilet. As I worked, I consoled myself with the thought that once the 60th birthday celebration concluded, I could enjoy some respite from my mother-in-law's presence. Just as I finished cleaning, my husband stirred from his slumber, surprised to find me still at work. "Sarah, are you all right? If you're not feeling well, don't push yourself too hard. Take a break," he urged. "Thank you, I'll take you up on that," I replied wearily. "Ouch, that hurts." But before I could finally rest, my mother-in-law suddenly let out a piercing cry, clutching her back in agony. Despite her earlier vitality, she now complained of sudden back pain, her demeanor shifting from lively to frail in an instant. "This is troublesome. My back is in excruciating pain. I can't manage anything. My chronic back issues have flared up once more. I won't be able to prepare food before our relatives arrive. Sarah, you're my only hope. But oh, what am I to do?" While her distressed demeanor seemed somewhat contrived, if her chronic back pain was genuine, then standing in the kitchen would indeed be impossible for her. With a heavy heart, I entrusted my husband with our daughter's care and reluctantly began cooking. "Sarah, are you certain you're all right?" "I'm fine. Cooking is my usual responsibility, remember?" I maintained a facade of strength for my husband, though my body was already weary. However, it was a significant day for my father-in-law, and I felt compelled to soldier on. My head is spinning, and the scent of food is making me queasy. But I must persevere for my father-in-law's sake. After completing the cooking, my father-in-law entered the kitchen to check on me. "You've worked tirelessly. Thank you for preparing all this food." "It's my pleasure. It's all for you. Please enjoy it later." As the relatives began to gather, each offering well wishes to my father-in-law, the atmosphere became animated. After the toasts were made and we were on the verge of starting the meal, my mother-in-law uttered something utterly shocking. "I regret to inform everyone that due to my chronic back pain acting up on this important birthday celebration, all the food was prepared by my daughter-in-law. I apologize for the lackluster quality of the dishes, courtesy of my unattractive daughter-in-law." Both my father-in-law and husband were stunned into silence by my mother-in-law's sudden outburst. "Not only is my daughter-in-law unattractive, but she's also clumsy and utterly inept. It's truly a shame," she continued, her tone dripping with disdain. As she exaggeratedly rubbed her back, my mother-in-law persisted in belittling me. "She's quite clumsy, you see. Without my assistance, she's helpless. I even question her ability to care for her own child. I worry whether Michael can cope with such a wife." What should have been a joyous occasion swiftly descended into a somber atmosphere, reminiscent more of a funeral than a celebration. My typically supportive husband, who should have been caring for our daughter, was conspicuously absent. Then, in a moment that shattered the tension, my father-in-law, who had been silently observing, rose to his feet. "Is that all you have to say?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the tension. "Seems like it. Perhaps it's time to bid farewell to the useless one," my mother-in-law added, her words dripping with contempt. In that instant, my husband strode into the room, carrying our daughter in a suitcase. His expression was unusually stern. "Dad, as you suggested, I've packed her belongings," he declared firmly. My mother-in-law's smile hinted at satisfaction. "Sarah, it appears you're being shown the door," she taunted. But to her astonishment, my husband handed the suitcase to her. "What?" My father-in-law's booming voice delivered the final blow. "Take that and leave this house immediately." Despite her initial confusion, my mother-in-law swiftly grasped the gravity of the situation. "Why am I the one being asked to leave? It's Sarah who's incompetent. The bathroom is always covered in mold, the toilet left filthy, and you dare to label Sarah as useless when you hardly lift a finger to cook. And let's not forget how terribly you've treated her. I've had my fill. It's a mother-in-law's responsibility to guide her daughter-in-law. I was merely pointing out her flaws." "Guidance. Please. Do you think we're living in?" my father-in-law began, but the raised eyebrows of an enraged father-in-law left no room for support. Realizing she wouldn't garner any sympathy from him, my mother-in-law resorted to her usual theatrics, turning to my husband and bursting into tears. "Michael, don't get the wrong idea. Someday, we might have to take care of your father, right? So, I was trying to teach Sarah how to be a good wife, as difficult as that may have been. Taking care of him, that's a joke. I won't be fooled by you anymore. You've been mistreating Sarah all along, even today." Despite feeling unwell, she still came to celebrate Dad's 60th birthday. "Sarah volunteered to join the celebration, didn't she? Don't deny it. And you made her foot the bill for the groceries, didn't you?" I found a receipt from today in her bag when she was trying to get candies for our daughter. It clearly shows Sarah paid with her credit card. I just asked her to pay because I didn't have any cash on me. I was planning to reimburse her later, honestly. Really? If I hadn't noticed, you would have stayed silent about it. I've ignored the typical mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflicts, but you've crossed a line. I'm tired of living with such a spiteful old woman. Witnessing my husband and father-in-law turn away from her, my mother-in-law reverted to her usual theatrics, blaming me with all her usual dramatic flair, tears streaming down her face. No, I haven't vocalized it, but it's undeniable that you've been mistreating me, isn't it? For the sake of my father-in-law and my husband, who had shown me unwavering support, I summoned the courage to speak the truth for the first time. I refuse to let my mother-in-law continue to dictate the narrative. That's correct. We were informed by Mia. We're aware of the derogatory remarks you made about Sarah at the supermarket and in the car afterward. You forced Sarah to handle all the weeding and cleaning in the house. Yeah, Grandma was mean to Mommy. She made her clean lots of things. You can't just dismiss a child's words. Maya doesn't lie. Let's review the dash cam footage. That should clarify everything. Excellent suggestion, Sarah. I'll do that right away. Ignoring his mother's protests, Michael strode out to the parked car, starting the engine and pulling up the dash cam footage. The latest model, equipped to record both the road and the car's interior, provided crystal clear visuals, including facial expressions. It's all there. She said those things. I murmured. I'm appalled, echoed everyone as they watched the footage unfold. This is utterly unacceptable. Unbelievable. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law, who had remained inside the house, adamantly denying any wrongdoing, began to panic as tension thickened, rushing barefoot toward the car. Stop this immediately. Don't watch. But no amount of shouting could halt the revelation. With all her transgressions laid bare, my mother-in-law stood speechless, stunned into silence. That's when my father-in-law casually handed her a single piece of paper. I filled out my portion. You just need to complete yours and submit it. What? Is this a divorce form? I had to prepare it just in case. I never imagined I'd have to use it. Never darken my doorstep again. Wait, I promise to change. Promises won't suffice, Sarah. Please find it in your heart to forgive me. Seeing my mother-in-law plead for forgiveness, tears streaming down her face, was a pitiful sight. But I suspected it might be yet another performance. With resolve, I gently pushed her away. You've revealed your mistreatment of your daughter-in-law. I can never forgive you. It's best you leave before the neighbors become involved. Oh no, this is dreadful. The commotion caught the attention of neighbors who observed from a distance. Perhaps unwilling to create a scene, she swiftly accepted the divorce papers and her suitcase, miraculously recovered from her supposed back pain, and dashed out of the garden. With the villains swiftly dealt with, our once tense home was now heavy with remorse. I apologize for all this disruption during your 60th birthday celebration, Dad, I said sincerely, bracing for his response. Sarah, you bear no blame. I'm the one who should apologize for all the trouble we've caused. Let's put this behind us and start anew, he replied. A smile graced my father-in-law's face. The relatives, too, looked on with sympathetic expressions. Later, they commended the dishes I had prepared and enjoyed them with gusto. In that moment, all weariness seemed to evaporate into thin air. Thus, we commemorated my father-in-law's 60th birthday in grand style. Despite her initial reluctance, my mother-in-law eventually agreed to the divorce, and it concluded amicably. It also came to light that she had been embezzling funds from my father-in-law's account, resulting in an order for her to repay $10,000 that she had spent recklessly. Struggling to secure employment due to her lack of experience, she now works as a nighttime janitor in an office building. With little money remaining, she resides in a dilapidated apartment that has seen better days. Meanwhile, I discovered that I was pregnant with my second child. The discomfort I had experienced earlier was attributed to my pregnancy. 5 months have elapsed since then, and my husband Michael has been incredibly supportive. Our ultrasound revealed that we are expecting a baby boy. Both Michael and my father-in-law eagerly anticipate his arrival, already preparing for his welcome. My father-in-law even sent over a selection of blue baby clothes. Our darling daughter is thrilled at the prospect of having a younger brother and diligently practices caring for a baby with her dolls each day. Witnessing her enthusiasm fills me with boundless joy.
My name is Helen Collins. I'm 29 years old and I work at the local library in a small town that most people have probably never heard of. My life is simple, maybe too simple for some, but it's mine. I've always been the quiet type, preferring the company of books to the loud outside world. The library is my sanctuary. It's a small, old building with creaky floors and shelves that have seen better days. But to me, it's perfect. Every day, I open the library doors at 8 a.m., turn on the lights, and breathe in the familiar scent of books. It's a routine that never gets old. My parents passed away when I was young, so I was raised by my grandmother. She was a kind woman, always encouraging me to read and learn. But she's gone now too, and I'm all alone. No siblings, no close relatives, just me and my small world. Good morning, Helen. Mr. Jenkins, a regular visitor, greets me as he walks in. He's an elderly man who spends his days reading history books. Good morning, Mr. Jenkins. The new shipment of history books arrived yesterday. I've set them aside for you, I reply with a smile. Ah, you know me too well, dear. He chuckles, shuffling towards the designated shelf. The day goes on like this, with familiar faces coming and going. I help a group of kids find books for their school project, recommend a romance novel to Mrs. Harrison, and guide Mr. Thompson to the science fiction section. It's a quiet life, but I like it. I find comfort in the predictability, the routine. And then one day, everything changed. The day Jack walked into my life. He came in looking for a book, but I could tell he wasn't the regular library type. He seemed out of place with his crisp suit and confident stride. "Can you help me find a book?" he asked, his voice smooth and inviting. "Of course. What are you looking for?" I replied, trying to keep my composure. "It's a novel, The Great Gatsby, I believe." "Right this way," I said, leading him to the classic section. As I handed him the book, our hands brushed briefly, sending a jolt through me. It was a simple touch, but it lingered in my mind. "Thank you, Helen," he said, reading my name tag. "I'm Jack." "It's nice to meet you, Jack." That brief encounter marked the beginning of everything. The beginning of a love that I thought would last a lifetime. The beginning of a journey that would take me from the quiet life I knew into a world of chaos and betrayal. If only I had known then what I know now, maybe things would have been different. But life doesn't come with a warning label, and sometimes we just have to learn the hard way. After that first meeting, Jack began to visit the library more frequently. It was odd, considering he didn't strike me as the reading type. But every time he came in, he'd ask for a book recommendation and then spend a few minutes chatting with me. One day, he walked in just as I was struggling with a box of newly arrived books. "Need a hand with that?" he offered, walking over. "That would be great, thanks," I said, relieved. As we placed the books on the shelves, he asked, "So, Helen, what got you into working at a library?" I shrugged. "I've always loved books. They're like friends, you know. Plus, it's nice and quiet here." He laughed. "I can see that. It's like a whole different world." Our conversations grew longer with each visit. I found out that Jack worked in his family's business, something to do with real estate. He was easy to talk to, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone was genuinely interested in me. Then one day, he surprised me. "Helen, would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" he asked, a hopeful look in his eyes. I was taken aback. "Like a date?" "Yes, like a date," he smiled. I hesitated. This was new territory for me, but there was something about him that made me want to say yes. "Okay, sure, I'd like that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We went to a small restaurant in town. It wasn't fancy, but it was cozy. We talked about everything and nothing, and for a few hours, I forgot about my usually solitary life. Walking home, Jack said, "I had a really great time tonight, Helen. You're very different from the people I usually meet." I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled. He continued, "I'd like to see you again. Would that be okay?" I nodded. Yes, I'd like that. From then on, we started seeing each other more regularly. He'd take me out to dinner or we'd go for walks. It was nice. For once, I felt like I was part of something more, part of a world that wasn't just about books and quietness. It wasn't long before I fell for him. Hard. He was charming and attentive, and he made me feel special. And when he proposed, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. Looking back, I wish I had seen the signs. I wish I had known that the charm was just a mask, a cover for something much less pleasant. But love has a way of blinding you, of making you ignore the warning signs. And I was very much in love, or at least I thought I was. After Jack and I got engaged, things started to change. It began with his parents. They didn't approve of me from the start. They thought I was below their son because I didn't come from money. The first time I met them, it was clear they didn't like me. We were at their house for dinner, and I was nervous. It was a big, fancy house, nothing like what I was used to. "Helen, this is my mother, Margaret, and my father, Richard," Jack introduced. "Nice to meet you," I said, trying to smile. Margaret looked me up and down. So you're the girl who works at the library." "Yes, I am," I replied, feeling smaller by the second. Richard chimed in. "Jack, couldn't you find someone more suitable?" I felt like crawling into a hole. The dinner was long and uncomfortable. They made it clear they thought I wasn't good enough for their son. But Jack stood up for me, which made me love him even more. Before our wedding, they insisted on a prenuptial agreement. They said it was just a formality. I didn't have much to lose, so I agreed without making a fuss. Once we got married, I moved into Jack's house, which was actually his parents' house. They had given it to him as a wedding gift, but they acted like it was still theirs. His parents came over all the time, unannounced. They'd walk in and start ordering me around. "Helen, make us some coffee," Margaret would demand as soon as she walked in. And I would, without saying anything. I didn't want to cause trouble. One day, Margaret pointed at the TV and said, "Remember, Helen, in case of divorce, you can't claim this." It was like that with everything. They reminded me constantly that everything in the house wasn't mine. Jack started changing too. He wasn't the man I fell in love with. He started joining in on the jokes his parents made about me. One evening, I was trying to decide what to wear for a family event. I asked Jack for his opinion. "This one makes you look less drab," he said, laughing. I was hurt. It was like he was a different person around his parents. He didn't stand up for me anymore. Instead, he laughed along with them. It was exhausting, living in that house. I felt like an outsider, an unwanted guest. I kept hoping things would get better, but they only got worse. The stress got to me. I started having stomach pains, bad ones. I tried to ignore them, but one day I collapsed at the library. I woke up in the hospital. The doctor said it was stress-related. I was in the hospital for a few days. Jack didn't visit. He didn't even call. I felt so alone. Then, one day, a notary came to my room. He had news. My great-aunt, someone I barely remembered, had passed away, and she had left me her fortune, $30 million. I couldn't believe it. I didn't even know what to do with that kind of money, but suddenly, I wasn't just the poor girl from the library anymore. When Jack and his parents found out, they came to visit. Suddenly, they were all smiles and sweetness. "Darling, we're so happy for you," Margaret said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Yes, we're a family. We should support each other," Richard added. I didn't buy it. It was too much of a change. After they left, I overheard them talking outside my room. They didn't know I was listening. "She's such a fool. Can you believe our luck?" Jack laughed. "We need to make sure she doesn't leave you, Jack. Maybe you should have a child with her. That will tie her down. Margaret suggested. I felt sick to my stomach. These people didn't care about me. They just wanted my money. I knew then what I had to do. I had to get out of that house, away from these people. I had to take control of my life. I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. I left the hospital with a plan in my mind. I knew what I had to do. As I got home, Jack and his parents were waiting. They were all smiles, acting like the caring family they never were. "Oh, Helen, we were so worried about you," Margaret exclaimed. I nodded but didn't say much. I needed to act normal, not to tip them off. Jack came closer. "So, when do you get the inheritance?" he asked, a little too eagerly. I looked at him, the man I thought I loved, and realized I didn't even recognize him anymore. "Soon," I said. "But it's not something you need to worry about." His smile faltered a bit. "But we're married, Helen. What's yours is mine, right?" I forced a smile. "Of course, darling." That night, I couldn't sleep. Their voices echoed in my head, their fake concern, their greed. It made me sick. I got up and started writing. I wrote down everything they had done, everything they had said. It was like a dam had broken, and years of pent-up frustration and pain poured out. The next morning, I had a meeting with a lawyer. I explained everything, showed him the prenuptial agreement. He was shocked but said the agreement would protect me. "You're doing the right thing," he assured me. When I got back, I found Jack and his parents in the living room. They looked up as I walked in. "There she is, our brave girl," Richard said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I sat down, clutching my purse. "I have something to say." They all looked at me, curious. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady. The room went silent. Then Margaret erupted. "What? You ungrateful little—" Jack was on his feet. "Helen, you can't be serious. We love you." "Do you, Jack?" "Because I don't feel loved. I feel used." Margaret was fuming. "We'll sue you. We'll take half of your inheritance." I reached into my purse and pulled out a copy of the prenuptial agreement. "Actually, you can't. This says neither of us can claim the other's property in case of divorce." They were speechless. For the first time, I felt in control. I stood up. "I'm leaving. I don't want any of you to contact me." I walked out of that house, their shouts and insults trailing behind me. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But as I drove away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was free from their disdain, their manipulation. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew it had to be better than the past. I rented a small apartment in the city. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. I was still dealing with the divorce, but I felt like I could handle it. One day, I got a call from the lawyer. "Helen, there's something you should know about your great-aunt's will." I was puzzled. "What about it?" "There's a condition. You need to use a portion of your inheritance for a charitable cause. It was your great-aunt's final wish." I was surprised. I had no idea. The lawyer continued. "She was quite the philanthropist. It seems she wanted to pass that on to you." I hung up the phone, deep in thought. My great-aunt had given me a chance to do something good. It felt like a sign, a push in a new direction. I started researching charities and causes. I wanted to do something meaningful, something that would make a difference. That's when I stumbled upon a small organization that helped women who were victims of domestic abuse. It struck a chord with me. I contacted them and set up a meeting. The woman I met, Linda, was passionate and dedicated. "We provide shelter, legal aid, and counseling to women who have nowhere else to go," Linda explained. I listened, moved by the stories she shared. "I want to help," I said, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. With Linda's guidance, I used a part of the inheritance to fund a new shelter. It was an incredible feeling, knowing I was helping other women find a way out, just like I had. A few weeks later, Linda invited me to the opening of the shelter. It was a small event, but the atmosphere was full of hope and gratitude. As people mingled, I noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was Sarah, an old colleague from the library. "Helen, is that you?" she asked, surprised. "Sarah, it's been so long," I said, hugging her. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I told her about the shelter, about my involvement. She listened, her eyes wide. "That's incredible, Helen. I had no idea." "It's a new chapter for me," I said, smiling. We spent the evening catching up. It felt good to reconnect with an old friend. It felt like pieces of my life were slowly falling back into place. As the event wrapped up, Linda came over. "Helen, I can't thank you enough. This shelter will change lives." I looked around at the faces of the women who now had a safe place to go. "It's the least I could do," I said, feeling a warmth in my heart that I hadn't felt in a very long time. The days started to blend into one another, each filled with the rewarding work at the shelter. I was finding a new sense of purpose, something that was truly mine. Then, out of the blue, my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in a while, Jack's. My heart raced with a mixture of emotions, but curiosity won. "Hello, Jack," I said, my voice calm. "Helen, I need to talk to you. Can we meet? It's urgent." His voice sounded desperate. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet him at a public coffee shop, hoping that being in a familiar place would give me strength. Sitting across from Jack, he looked different, defeated, almost pitiful. His eyes were pleading. "Helen, I made a huge mistake. I want you back. I've realized how much you mean to me," he blurted out. I looked at him, feeling nothing but contempt. "Why now, Jack?" He sighed. "My parents, they controlled everything. They were the reason our marriage failed. I was weak, but I'm different now." I felt a surge of anger. "You blame your parents? You stood by while they treated me like dirt. You laughed with them, Jack." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Please, Helen, I know I was wrong. I've changed." I stared at him, seeing the man I once loved but now felt nothing for. "Changed or not, it's too late. I feel nothing for you, Jack. Nothing but contempt." His face fell, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I married. But it was fleeting. "I'm sorry, Jack. I've moved on. I have a life now, a purpose. There's no place for you in it," I said firmly. He nodded slowly, a look of resignation on his face. "I understand. I just had to try." Leaving the coffee shop, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. Truly over. The next day, there was an event at the shelter. A local artist had donated a sculpture, and it was to be unveiled in the garden. As I stood there, surrounded by people who supported and believed in me, I felt a sense of belonging. Sarah, my old colleague from the library, stood beside me. "You've done something amazing here, Helen," she said, smiling. The artist pulled the cover off the sculpture, revealing a figure of a woman reaching up to the sky. It symbolized hope, strength, and new beginnings. Applause filled the air, and for a moment, everything felt right in the world. Linda, the woman who had helped me so much, came over. "Helen, this is just the beginning. There's so much more we can do." I looked around at the faces filled with hope and knew she was right. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it fully. My new life was busy and fulfilling. Every day at the shelter brought new challenges and rewards. My confidence grew, and for the first time in years, I felt in control of my destiny. I even started taking self-defense classes, something I would have never imagined doing before. One day, as I was leaving the shelter, I saw a car parked outside. It was my mother-in-law, Margaret, and she stepped out as soon as she saw me. "Helen, we need to talk," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard. "I have nothing to say to you, Margaret," I replied, my voice steady. "Please, just hear me out. I've realized how wrong we were," she pleaded. I stopped and looked at her. She seemed genuine, but I couldn't forget the past. What do you want, Margaret? I want to apologize. I treated you terribly. I've lost my son because of it, and I don't want to lose you too. You were like the daughter I never had, she said, her eyes glistening with tears. I felt a pang of something, sympathy, perhaps, but I pushed it away. Margaret, you made my life a living hell. An apology won't change that. I've moved on, and I suggest you do the same, I said firmly. She reached out to me, but I stepped back. Please, Helen, I know I can't undo the past, but I want to make things right. I shook my head. It's too late for that. Goodbye, Margaret. As I walked away, I felt her gaze on my back, but I didn't look back. I had learned to stand up for myself, and there was no going back to the way things were. The next day, I received a letter from Jack's lawyer. He was contesting the divorce settlement. I wasn't surprised, but I was ready. I met with my lawyer, a sharp woman named Rachel. He's got no leg to stand on, Helen. The prenuptial agreement is clear. He's just trying to intimidate you, she said confidently. I nodded. I'm not afraid of him anymore. Let's fight this. The court date arrived, and I walked in with my head held high. Jack was there with his lawyer, and for a moment, our eyes met. There was a flash of the old Jack, the one I had loved, but it vanished quickly. The judge listened to both sides and then made her decision. The prenuptial agreement stood, and Jack's claims were dismissed. I felt a surge of relief and triumph. After the court session, Jack approached me. Helen, I'm sorry. I was wrong, he said, his voice low. I looked at him, seeing the man I once loved, but now felt nothing for. Goodbye, Jack. Take care of yourself, I said, and walked away. As I left the courtroom, I felt a sense of closure. That chapter of my life was finally over, and a new one was just beginning. At the shelter, we were planning a fundraiser, and it was taking all my attention. The support from the community was overwhelming, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The night of the fundraiser arrived, and the place was buzzing with energy. People from all walks of life had come to support our cause. As I looked around, I realized how far I had come. From a quiet, timid woman to someone who stood up for herself and others. Helen, you did it. This is amazing, Sarah said, coming up to me. I smiled. We did it. And there's so much more to do. As the event went on, I felt a sense of accomplishment and purpose. This was my life now, and I was exactly where I was meant to be.
I'm Liz, and by some twist of fate, I'm married to the most amazing guy I've ever met, Alex. We're both 28, got our own place, pay our bills, and live a life that's ours. It's been a year since we said I do, and honestly, life's been good, except for one little thing: Alex's parents. Now, don't get me wrong, I never expected to be the daughter-in-law in shining armor, but I also didn't expect to be the family's unwanted guest. The day I met my in-laws, it felt like walking into a lion's den with a stake tied to my neck. My mother-in-law, Jane, had this way of looking at me, like she was trying to figure out if I was more of a nuisance or just plain boring. I could tell she had sized me up and found me lacking before I even had a chance to say hello. Alex had warned me about his mom. She can be a bit much, he said, as we drove to their place that first time. But don't take it to heart, okay? I didn't. Or at least I tried not to. At dinner, I was passing the salt when Jane said, "You know, Stephanie used to cook such wonderful meals. Remember that risotto, honey?" She said to Alex, who just nodded, his jaw tight. "Yeah, I remember," he replied, not looking at me. I sat there, salt shaker in hand, feeling like I was invisible. They all talked about Stephanie as if I wasn't there. I felt a pang in my chest, but I swallowed it down with a smile. "Sounds like she was a great cook," I said, trying to seem unaffected. Jane's eyes met mine, and she smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, she was. She was a lot of things." That night, I told Alex how I felt. "It's like she's measuring me against some ghost." Alex hugged me close. You're the one I chose, Liz. That's all that matters. I wanted to believe him, but as I'd learn, Jane had a long game in mind, and I was the pawn she was eager to sacrifice. I just didn't know it yet. Living with an allergy isn't just inconvenient, it's like having a shadow that's constantly whispering danger in your ear. Since I was a kid, peanuts have been my arch nemesis. It started with a spoonful of peanut paste and a trip to the emergency room that left my parents with a crystal clear message. Keep her away from peanuts and a whole host of other foods if you want her to grow up. It's not just peanuts, though. Soy, peas, cherries, almonds, tomatoes, apricots, bananas, and even potatoes, they're all off limits. It's a list that makes waiters raise an eyebrow and friends hesitate to invite me over for dinner. It's also a list that my mother-in-law, Jane, knows by heart, yet she somehow manages to question every single time we're over for dinner. Are you sure you can't even have a little bit of this pie? It's got almond extract, she'd ask, with a tone that hovered between concern and disbelief. I would smile politely, though I'd rather not, and say, "Yeah, I'm sure. Thanks, though." It was the same dance every time. I remember once, at a family gathering, I was navigating the buffet, a mental checklist running through my head. Alex was by my side, plate in hand, trying to help me find something safe to eat. That's when Jane swooped in, her voice sickly sweet. "Liz, you must try this casserole. I made sure it was Liz-friendly," she announced, but the glint in her eye didn't match her nurturing words. Alex paused, his fork mid-air. "Mom, you used cream of mushroom soup in this, right?" he asked, knowing full well that many brands included soy, a big no-no for me. Jane's smile faltered for a second. "Oh, I think so. It should be fine." But it wasn't fine, and we both knew it. We made our excuses, me leaving the casserole untouched. But the incident stuck with me. It was a small victory in what felt like an ongoing battle, a battle where Jane held all the cards because she controlled the kitchen. I've learned to navigate this world with careful steps. Eating out is a strategic operation. Alex and I were at our favorite Italian place, a rare find that understood the gravity of food allergies. I'd recited my usual spiel to the waiter, who nodded understandingly. Alex watched me with those soft eyes of his, the ones that said he'd do anything to make my life easier. "You okay?" he asked, after the waiter left. "Yeah, I'm fine. I just hate making a fuss," I replied, folding my napkin on my lap. "You're not making a fuss. You're making sure you don't, die," he said, half joking, half serious. I laughed, a short, grateful sound. Well, when you put it that way. After dinner, as we walked under the clear night sky, I felt light, happy. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Jane. Her words were like a cloud over the moon, darkening the moment. "Be careful, Liz. Not everyone takes your condition seriously. Wouldn't want anything to happen to you." I read the text to Alex, who wrapped an arm around me, pulling me close. "She's just trying to get to you," he said. But as much as I wanted to shrug it off, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's message was more than just a jab. It was a warning, a reminder that my allergy made me vulnerable, not just to food, but to people like her, who saw it as a weakness to be exploited. The rest of the walk home, I couldn't help but think about all the close calls, all the accidental exposures, and how easily something could go wrong. It wasn't just the peanuts, or the soy, or the peas. It was the realization that my allergy was more than a personal battle. It was a chink in my armor that someone like Jane could see as an opportunity. And that thought was scarier than any allergic reaction I'd ever had. Dinners at Jane's house were always a production, like a play where everyone knew their parts except me. I was the wild card, the one who could unintentionally cause a scene with a single bite. Alex tried to make it better, but there's only so much you can do when you're playing in someone else's home court. One particular evening, the tension was as thick as the gravy on the table. Jane was bustling around, placing dish after dish on the table. I sat there, my own plate empty, waiting to figure out what I could eat without a trip to the hospital. "Alex, darling, pass the green beans to Liz. They're just divine," Jane said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. I eyed the beans, but something seemed off. "What's in them?" I asked. "Oh, just a touch of almond slivers for crunch," she said, waving a hand dismissively. I put my hand up, stopping Alex's reach. "I can't eat those, remember? Almonds are a no-go for me." Jane feigned surprise, a hand to her chest. "Oh dear, I must have forgotten. Silly me." Alex's chair scraped back as he stood up. "Mom, this is serious. Liz could end up in the hospital." His voice was firm, edged with a frustration that made Jane's eyes narrow just a little. "I just wanted to make something nice," she said. "It's not my fault Liz has all these allergies." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The other relatives glanced around, forks paused midair, not sure where to look. I felt a flush creeping up my neck, embarrassed by the spotlight. Alex's dad, Mark, tried to break the tension. "Let's just enjoy the meal, shall we? There's plenty Liz can eat." But the damage was done. The rest of the dinner passed in strained politeness, with Jane asking pointed questions about my allergies, as if she were taking notes for next time. Later, when Alex and I were alone, he apologized. "I'm sorry, Liz. I should have double-checked everything before we came." I shook my head, tired of feeling like a problem to be managed. "It's not your fault, but I'm starting to think your mom does these things on purpose." He didn't answer, and he didn't need to. We both knew the truth. Jane was serving up a side of malice with every meal, and I was the main course. I could always tell when Jane had been working on Alex. He'd get this distant look in his eyes, like he was seeing me, but also seeing through me, weighing her words against his own judgment. This particular evening, it was like a cloud had settled over him, and I knew it before he even said a word. "Mom thinks we should consider..." "Well, she thinks we might not be thinking about the future enough," Alex muttered, not meeting my eye as he fumbled with the TV remote. "The future?" I asked, a sinking feeling in my gut. "Yeah, kids and your health issues," he continued, the word issues hanging awkwardly in the air between us. I felt a tightness in my chest. "She talked to you about my allergies again, didn't she?" He sighed, setting the remote down. "She's just worried, Liz. She thinks it's a lot for us to handle, especially if we want a family." I bristled. "We've talked about this. I've managed so far, haven't I? And there are plenty of people with allergies who have kids." Alex ran a hand through his hair, a sure sign he was stressed. I know. It's just... she has this way of making me doubt things." The room was quiet for a moment, the tension thick. I watched him, this man I loved, wrestling with the seeds of doubt his mother had planted. "Alex, do you doubt us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "No." He looked up, finally, his eyes clear and firm. "No, I don't. I just hate that she keeps bringing it up. I hate that it makes us fight." I reached for his hand, our fingers intertwining. "We're not fighting. We're on the same side, remember?" He nodded, pulling me into a hug. "You and me against the world, right?" "Right," I said, but as I held him, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's words were like weeds, threatening to grow wild and choke the life out of the beautiful thing we had. And I knew then that it wasn't just my allergies that needed managing. It was the doubts that could seep into the cracks of even the strongest relationships. The news of my pregnancy came as a surprise, a happy one for Alex and me, a complicated one for everyone else. The day we announced it to his parents, Jane's reaction was like watching a robot trying to mimic human emotions. A pause, then a smile that didn't quite match the situation. "We're going to have a baby, Mom," Alex said, his voice a mix of pride and caution as he gauged his mother's reaction. "That's wonderful," Jane managed to say, the words sounding foreign in her mouth. "We must have a family dinner to celebrate." I was skeptical. Celebrations at Jane's were never just celebrations, but I saw the hopeful look in Alex's eyes and agreed. The night of the dinner, the house was buzzing with relatives. Jane was the perfect hostess, floating from guest to guest with a grace that felt almost genuine. When she reached us, her smile was practiced. "Congratulations, Liz," she said. "This is such a joyous occasion." "Thank you, Jane," I replied, trying to match her formality. "We're excited." Alex wrapped his arm around my waist, a silent thank you for playing along. As dinner approached, I felt the familiar anxiety. A table full of food was a minefield for me, but tonight, I hoped, would be different. The table was a feast, dishes upon dishes laid out, and I felt every eye on me as I hesitated, my hand hovering over the options. "Go on, dear," Jane urged. "Eat up. You're eating for two now." I smiled weakly, choosing the safest options, vegetables and rice, plain and simple. But as I reached for a slice of bread, Jane stopped me. "Actually, maybe not that one," she said quickly. "I'm not sure if the baker used soy flour." I paused, bread in hand, and met her gaze. There was a flicker of something there. Concern, or was it a challenge? "Thank you for letting me know," I said, putting the bread down. But the warning bells were already ringing in my head. How did she know about the soy flour? It seemed too close a call, too perfect to save. The rest of the meal passed in a blur, congratulations mingling with the clinking of glasses. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's hospitality was a veneer, and beneath it lay a trap, set and waiting for just the right moment. The family dinner in honor of our future baby was nothing short of a banquet. Jane had outdone herself, and there was a spread that would make a Thanksgiving dinner look modest. But my stomach was in knots, not from hunger, but from fear. Every dish was a potential hazard, a hidden enemy that could send me to the hospital, or worse. As we all took our seats, the chatter around the table was lively, filled with the usual family gossip and stories. Jane was at the head of the table, presiding over the feast like a queen in her court. She called everyone to attention with a gentle tap of her glass. "Before we begin, I just want to say how thrilled we are to be celebrating Liz and Alex's upcoming addition to our family," Jane announced, her voice steady and clear. There was a round of hear, hear, and applause. I forced a smile, feeling Alex squeeze my hand under the table. "Thank you, everyone," I said. "We're really looking forward to this new chapter in our lives." The meal began, and I tentatively picked at my food, choosing the simplest items. Alex watched me, his brow furrowed with concern. "You doing okay?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, just being careful," I replied, pushing a roasted potato around my plate. Jane's eyes were on me, and I felt like a specimen under a microscope. "Liz, you haven't touched your salad. The dressing is on the side, just as you like it," she said, her voice tinged with a forced cheerfulness. "Thank you, Jane. I'm just not much of an appetite tonight," I said, avoiding the salad that I knew could easily contain hidden allergens. As the dinner wore on, the tension grew. Every time Jane offered me something, my anxiety spiked. The room felt hot, the walls inching closer with each passing minute. Then came the cake. It was a beautiful confection, layers of sponge and cream that made the room ooh and ah. Jane cut a slice and handed it to me with a smile that might have been genuine if I hadn't known better. "For the mom-to-be," she said. I looked at the cake, then at Alex, then at Jane. "I really shouldn't," I said, "but it looks delicious." "Oh, come on, Liz. One little bite won't hurt. For the baby," Jane pressed, her voice sweet as the icing. That's when Alex's dad, Mark, stepped in, his hand swift as he knocked the plate from my hands. The cake tumbled to the floor, and a stunned silence fell over the room. "What the hell, Dad?" Alex exclaimed, his voice a mix of anger and confusion. Mark stood, his face pale but his voice firm. "I saw the label in the trash. That cake has peanut oil in it." The room erupted in chaos. Jane's face was the picture of shock, but her eyes gave her away. There was a flash of something there. Fear, maybe? Guilt? Alex stood, his chair clattering behind him. "Mom, did you know about this?" he demanded. Jane's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. And in that moment, the truth was as clear as the danger that had been on my plate. The room was dead silent after Mark's revelation, the dropped cake like a crime scene on the hardwood floor. Everyone's eyes were locked on Jane, who seemed to shrink under the collective gaze. "Mom, is it true? Did you know?" Alex's voice cut through the tension, sharp and demanding. Jane's eyes flickered with something dark before she regained her composure. "Of course not. I would never." Her voice trailed off, unconvincing. Mark wasn't having any of it. "I saw the shopping list, Jane. Peanut oil for cake. "It was right there, in your handwriting," he said, his voice steady but laced with disappointment. The murmurs around the table grew louder, a mix of disbelief and anger bubbling up from the family. Alex was shaking his head, his hands balled into fists. "How could you, Mom? Liz could have died." I was frozen in my seat, the gravity of the situation anchoring me down. This wasn't just carelessness or forgetfulness, it was intentional. Jane's mask finally slipped, her face twisted in anger. "I didn't want it to come to this, but she's not right for you, Alex. She's weak, and now she's bringing a child into this world who will be just like her." Alex took a step toward his mother, incredulous. "Weak? Liz is the strongest person I know. And you? How could you be so cruel?" I could feel the eyes on me, waiting for me to break down, to crumble under the weight of Jane's words. But I didn't. "Jane," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, "you've made your feelings very clear. But this is not just about me. This is about a family, your grandchild." Jane looked away, her jaw clenched, and for the first time, I saw the hint of fear in her eyes. Maybe she realized that her actions hadn't just endangered me, but her relationship with her son, her reputation, everything. The rest of the evening was a blur. There were arguments, tears, and hushed conversations as the family tried to process what had happened. Alex and I left early, the weight of the evening heavy on our shoulders. We didn't speak much on the drive home. What was there to say? The truth was out, and with it, the facade of a polite, if not happy family was shattered. All because of a peanut. The drive home was quiet, the kind of silence that's heavy, filled with things unsaid. When we finally walked through our front door, Alex and I just stood there, the echo of the night's drama still ringing in our ears. Alex was the first to break the silence. "I can't believe my own mother would do something like that," he said, his voice hollow. I sat down on the couch, the cushion failing to comfort me. "I know, it's a lot to take in." He sat beside me, taking my hands in his. "I'm so sorry, Liz. It's unforgivable." I looked at him, seeing the pain in his eyes, and my heart ached. "It's not your fault, Alex. We couldn't have known she'd go this far." But the truth was there, hanging between us. Jane had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The family was in pieces. Some stood by us, shocked and appalled by Jane's actions, while others struggled to wrap their heads around the reality of the situation. The next few days were a whirlwind. Alex's phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls. Relatives wanted to express their shock, their support, their apologies. And through it all, there was a deafening silence from Jane. No apologies, no explanations, nothing. Alex finally broke the news to me a week later. "Dad's left her. He can't get past what she did. He said it's been a long time coming." I wasn't sure how to feel. Relief, sadness, pity? "And Jane?" I asked tentatively. "He said she's not handling it well. She's alone now," Alex replied, a twinge of something like regret in his tone. We sat in our living room, the walls we'd painted together, the furniture we'd picked out during countless trips to the store. It was our home, filled with our memories, our love. And outside, there was a storm brewing, one that threatened to uproot everything we knew. But in that moment, I realized that no matter what happened, we had each other. We were a team, about to bring a new life into the world, and that was what mattered. "I love you, Liz," Alex said, pulling me close. "I love you too," I whispered back. The fallout from that night would linger. The scars it left on our family would take time to heal. But as I looked at Alex, at the life we'd built, and the future we were about to embark on, I knew that we'd weather any storm together. And as for Jane, she was a chapter in our lives that we had closed, a story that we wouldn't let define us. From now on, it was just us, our baby, and the road ahead. Whatever it brought, we'd face it together. I'm Emily. I was a 25-year-old living a quiet, unremarkable existence with my boyfriend Mike in a relationship that had seen better days. We'd been together since college, a pair drawn together more by familiarity than by the fervent passion of star-crossed lovers. Our arguments were frequent, often about Mike's disinterest in planning for the future or his latest gaming marathon that would last well into the early hours, leaving me to sleep alone. We were two people dancing around the inevitable conversation of, "Where's this going?" without ever actually taking the floor. It's not that we didn't care for each other. It's just that somewhere along the line, we stopped trying to make it work. My parents, Sue and George, were the antithesis of us. Married for over 30 years, they still exchanged loving glances and shared private jokes, their bond seemingly unbreakable. They were my foundation, the steadfast love I aspired to find for myself, even if it wasn't going to be with Mike. On the evening of the crash, I remember arguing with Mike over something as trivial as unsorted laundry. He had promised to do it, and once again, the promise was as empty as the laundry basket was full. "Can't you just do one thing you say you're going to do?" I had asked, exasperation straining my voice. "It's just laundry, Em. It'll get done. Eventually," he had replied, his attention fixed on his computer screen. The argument had fizzled out as they usually did, with neither of us truly addressing the underlying issues. Later, as I sat in the back seat of my parents' car, the warmth of their chatter was a soothing balm to the residual frustration from the argument with Mike. They were celebrating another year of Mom's life, and their joy was infectious. Then, the world turned on its axis. Headlights merged with the sound of metal on metal, and everything went black. When I awoke, it was to the antiseptic smell of a hospital, the relentless beeping of the heart monitor, and a heavy blanket of dread. The doctor's words were clinical and detached, but the message was clear. My parents didn't make it, and my legs, my perfectly normal, taken-for-granted legs, might never carry me again. The truth settled like a stone in my stomach. I was suddenly, terrifyingly alone. Mike, the man I had just argued with about laundry, was now my only connection to a life before the crash. The life where my biggest worry was whether he'd sort the whites from the colors. As the reality of my parents' absence and my potential paralysis began to truly register, a hollow despair took root in me. The future, once a landscape of possibilities, now seemed like a barren field. The hospital room was a bubble where time moved both too quickly and not at all. After what seemed like an eternity of white walls and echoing silence, Mike walked in, his parents, Janet and Bob, a step behind him. The atmosphere was thick with a somberness that made my heart sink even lower, if that was possible. Mike pulled a chair up next to my bed and took my hand, his usual bravado absent. His parents stood by the door, a united front of awkward concern. "Hey, Em," Mike began, his voice a rough whisper. "I've been doing some thinking, a lot of thinking, actually." "Thinking?" I echoed, my voice dull. "About what?" "About us," he said, and his eyes met mine, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. All of this, it's made me see how short life can be. I wanted to say something, to ask what he meant, but the words seemed to stick in my throat. "I don't want to wait for the perfect moment anymore because it might never come," he continued, squeezing my hand. "What I'm trying to say is, will you marry me, Emily?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. It was the last thing I thought I'd hear, especially now. I searched his face for a sign of the impulsive Mike I knew, the one who acted first and thought later. But all I saw was earnestness. His mother, Janet, stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her. "We want you to be a part of our family, Emily. We'll take care of you." "And it's not out of pity," Bob added quickly. "It's because we love you, and we want to support Mike in taking this step." I was stunned, my mind racing. This was a lifeline, unexpected, and maybe even a little reckless, but a lifeline nonetheless. I looked at Mike, really looked at him, and saw not just my sometimes immature boyfriend, but a man offering his support in the most uncertain time of my life. "Mike, My voice trailed off as I tried to gather my thoughts. "It's okay, Em. You don't have to decide right now. I just wanted you to know how I feel," he said, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of my hand. I thought about my parents, about the unwavering love and support they had always shown me. Wasn't this what they would have wanted? For me to be loved and cared for, no matter what? "Mike, I don't know what the future holds for me, for us. But yes," I found myself saying, the words stronger than I felt. "Yes, I'll marry you." A smile, the first genuine one I'd seen in days, spread across Mike's face. Janet let out a soft sob, covering her mouth with her hand, and even Bob's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Moving into my parents' house with Mike should have been a fresh start, a new chapter. The house was too big for just one person, and everywhere I looked, I saw memories of my parents. I thought having Mike with me would fill some of those empty spaces, but I was quickly learning that his presence was a reminder of what was missing, not a replacement. The first few days, he was attentive, always checking on me, making sure I had everything I needed within reach. But as days turned into weeks, the attentive husband act began to wear thin. Mike started spending more time on his computer, his headphones on, shutting me out. One evening, as I maneuvered my wheelchair into the kitchen, I found him staring blankly at his screen. "Mike, have you thought about looking for a new job?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "The insurance won't cover everything, and the bills are starting to pile up." He didn't look away from the screen. "I told you, Em, I'm taking care of you now. That's my job." "But I can take care of myself during the day," I pushed back, feeling a twinge of frustration. "You don't need to be here all the time." Finally, he turned to face me, his expression a mix of irritation and something else I couldn't quite read. "What do you want from me, Em? I'm here, aren't I?" I was taken aback by his tone. "Being physically here isn't the same as being present, Mike. I need a partner, not just a roommate." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the tile. "You know what, Em? Maybe I need more than this too. Maybe I wasn't cut out to be a nursemaid." His words stung, and I watched him storm out, the door slamming behind him. I was left alone in the silence of the kitchen, the weight of his words settling around me like dust. I wasn't just alone, I was lonely. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but think about how quickly our modest honeymoon period had ended. The vows we had taken felt like they were from another lifetime. The Mike, who had lovingly promised to be by my side, in sickness and in health, seemed like a stranger now. As the weeks dragged on, his absences grew longer, and the excuses more flimsy. He was either out with friends or lost in a digital world that didn't seem to have room for me. I felt like an obstacle in his life, a burden he hadn't anticipated. One particularly tough day, when the pain was bad, and the house felt more like a mausoleum than a home, I heard the front door open. Expecting Mike, I called out, "Is that you?" "Yeah, it's me," he replied, his voice distant. "I'm just grabbing a few things, then I'm heading out again." I wheeled myself to the hallway, watching as he rifled through a drawer for his keys. "Going out with friends?" I asked, trying to mask the hurt in my voice. He paused, keys in hand, and sighed. I need some space, okay? It's not easy for me either, all this." I nodded, biting back tears. "I know. I just thought we could maybe spend some time together, like we used to." He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Maybe when things settle down a bit, I gotta go." The house felt emptier with each passing day, a vast space filled with silence and the ghost of better times. It wasn't just Mike's absence or the silence left in the wake of my parents' voices. It was the small things that started to go missing. A vase my mother loved, a silver frame holding a family photo, a painting that used to hang in the hallway. I first noticed it when I was trying to distract myself with memories. I wheeled myself into the living room, intent on looking through the photo albums. But as my eyes scanned the room, they fell on the bare patch of wall where the painting had been. Confusion knotted my brow. "Mike!" I called out, unsure when he had last gone out. There was no answer, and the emptiness of the house seemed to echo back at me. That evening, when Mike returned, I asked him, "Have you seen the landscape painting that used to be in the hallway?" He barely glanced up from his phone. "Oh, that old thing? Yeah, it was getting dusty, and I figured we could use the space for something else." Something about his casual dismissal didn't sit right with me. "But it was my mom's favorite," I said, a tremor of unease in my voice. He shrugged, his attention still half on his screen. "We can get another painting, Em. It's no big deal." But it was a big deal. The items that went missing next were unmistakable, things that had been in my family for years. One afternoon, I caught Janet, Mike's mom, in the act. She was bustling around the living room with a big black garbage bag. "Janet, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharp with alarm. She jumped, a guilty flush creeping up her neck. "Oh, just some spring cleaning, dear. This place is cluttered with so many old things." "But those are my things," I protested, my heart rate picking up. There, she cooed, her voice sickly sweet. "We're just making things nicer for you. You'll thank us later." I watched her like a hawk every time she visited after that, but the thefts became sneakier, more calculated. And every time I brought it up, I was met with reassurances that it was all in my best interest. One night, lying in bed, I turned to Mike, who was scrolling through his phone, as had become his nighttime ritual. "Mike, your parents have been taking things from the house. My things." He didn't look up. "Mom's just trying to help. You know she's got a knack for this stuff." "Help?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my tone. "By taking my parents' belongings?" He sighed, finally setting his phone down and turning to face me. "Look, Em, they think we should be looking forward, not backward. They're just trying to take some of the load off you." I wanted to scream, to rage against the violation, the disrespect. But I was tired of fighting, tired of questioning my own sanity. "This isn't what I want," I whispered, the fight draining out of me. Mike reached over and patted my hand, a gesture that felt more patronizing than comforting. "Try to get some sleep, Em. Things will look better in the morning." I couldn't take it anymore and confided in Anna, my closest friend who was also a massage therapist. She had been helping with my rehabilitation, her visits a rare source of relief. "Anna, things are going missing around the house," I confided as she worked on my stiff muscles. "And I can't shake the feeling that Mike and his parents are behind it." Anna paused, her hands stilling on my shoulders. "Have you talked to Mike about this?" "I have, but he just brushes it off. Says his parents are helping us by decluttering." I let out a hollow laugh. "But it's only my family's things that are disappearing." Anna's brows furrowed in concern. "That doesn't sound right, Em. Do you want me to do something? Maybe come by more often? Keep an eye out?" The idea sparked something in me, a plan forming from the embers of my frustration. "Could you, I don't know, maybe help me set up some sort of camera or something to record what's going on when I'm not in the room?" With a nod of determination, Anna agreed. "I'll bring something over tomorrow. We'll get to the bottom of this." True to her word, Anna came back the next day with some discreet recording devices, which she placed in strategic locations around the house. It felt like something out of a spy movie, and if I wasn't so desperate for the truth, I might have laughed at the absurdity of it all. A few days later, Anna returned with the recordings, and we sat down to listen. The voices of Mike and his parents filled the room, and the blood in my veins turned to ice as their scheme unfolded through their casual conversation. "And once we get her committed, the house and everything in it will be ours," Mike's voice said, clear and cold. "Yeah, the place will sell for a fortune, and all those antiques? Pure profit," his mother added, her tone greedy. "We just need to make sure Emily doesn't catch on before we have everything in place," his father chimed in. Tears streamed down my face as I listened to their betrayal. These people, who had promised to care for me, to be my family, were plotting against me. Anna reached over, her hand gripping mine tightly. "We have to do something, Em," she said, her voice laced with anger. I wiped my eyes, the sorrow quickly giving way to a steely resolve. "We will. I'm not going to let them get away with this." The morning after listening to the recordings, I tried to act normal, but every word they said, every smile they gave, felt like a lie. It was during breakfast when I noticed something was off. The usual noise of the city that drifted in through the open window was absent. I wheeled myself over to see what was happening, only to find that the ramps that allowed me access to the garden were gone. "Mike!" I called out, my voice laced with panic. "Where are the ramps?" He came into the room, feigning ignorance. "The ramps? Oh, they were looking a bit worn. Thought they needed fixing." I stared at him, the man I thought I knew. "And you didn't think to tell me? How am I supposed to get around?" His gaze was evasive as he shrugged. "I just thought you'd be safer inside for now. You know, until we get new ones." The room felt like it was spinning, and it wasn't from my injury. Safer? Or trapped? The words slipped out before I could stop them. He didn't respond, just turned and walked away, leaving me stewing in a mix of anger and helplessness. Later, when I asked Janet about it, she was syrupy sweet with false concern. "We're just looking out for you, dear. We wouldn't want you to have an accident," she said, touching my shoulder with feigned tenderness. I pulled away from her touch, feeling the sting of their deceit. "I didn't realize needing ramps qualified as a hazard," I replied, my voice steady though my insides were shaking. Janet's eyes hardened for a moment before she regained her composure. "We're just trying to help, Emily. It's for the best." That night, as I lay in bed, the darkness felt oppressive. Mike was out again, probably drowning his guilt in cheap beer and cheaper thrills. I reached for my phone, the screen a small beacon in the dark, and dialed the number Anna had given me for emergencies. "Anna," I whispered when she picked up, "they've removed the ramps. I'm literally trapped in my own home." Her voice was firm, a lifeline in the tumultuous sea I was drowning in. "Hang tight, Em. I'm going to make some calls. We're going to sort this out." Next day, I was in the kitchen when I heard the doorbell. My heart pounded as I maneuvered towards the entrance. It was Anna, flanked by a man and woman wearing crisp suits and stern expressions. They were from a local disability rights organization, here to assess my living situation. Beside them was my lawyer, Mr. Hammond, clutching a leather briefcase. "Emily, we're here to make things right," Anna said, her determination matching the resolve in my chest. Mr. Hammond stepped forward. "We need to establish the facts first, Emily. I'll need to see the house. Check against the inventory of your parents' belongings." As we moved through the house, the representatives from the service took notes, their disapproval clear at the missing ramps and the blatant disregard for my welfare. Mike walked in during the commotion, surprise etching his face. "Em, what's going on? Who are these people?" I looked at him, really looked at him, allowing the full weight of my gaze to settle on his shoulders. "I'm taking back control, Mike. This is my lawyer, and these are advocates for people with disabilities. They're here to ensure my home is safe and that my rights are respected." Janet and Bob entered the fray, confusion turning to fear as they realized the seriousness of the situation. "Emily, darling, what is this about?" Janet's voice trembled. "It's about my rights, my home, and the truth," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Mr. Hammond is here to confirm the inventory of my inheritance." Mr. Hammond opened his briefcase, pulling out documents and photographs. "We have detailed records of all items bequeathed to Mrs. Harper. It seems several are missing." Bob's face paled. "Now, Emily, I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," I replied, the recordings Anna had provided playing in my head. "And I have more than just missing items to discuss." Mike's parents looked at each other, the facade of the caring in-laws crumbling before my eyes. Mike stood there, silent, the reality of the situation dawning on him. Anna moved closer to me. "We also have evidence of the conversations you've had regarding Emily's property and well-being." The advocates from the Disability Service spoke up. "Removing access to the ramps is a direct violation of Mrs. Harper's rights. We'll be taking action." As Mr. Hammond laid out the evidence of their theft and their plans for my future, I saw the trap I had been in from the outside. But now, the tables had turned. I was no longer the victim in their game. I was the one calling the shots. Mike finally found his voice. I can explain." But I shook my head. "Save it, Mike. I've heard enough." Janet started to cry, and Bob put an arm around her, but there was no comfort to be found in their deceit. The day of the trial was a culmination of everything I had endured. The courtroom was stark, the air thick with tension. Mike and his parents were on one side, looking nothing like the family that had once promised to care for me. I was on the other, with Anna beside me and Mr. Hammond at the ready, with his briefcase of evidence. As the proceedings began, the judge looked down at us from his bench, his gaze lingering on me for a moment. "We are here to examine the evidence regarding the allegations of theft and the premeditated exploitation of Emily Harper," he said. Mr. Hammond presented the recordings, the inventory discrepancies, and testimonies from the disability advocates. The evidence was damning, and Mike's family could do little but squirm under the weight of their own deceit. Janet sobbed quietly, her sobs a soundtrack to the unraveling of their scheme. "We never meant for things to go this far," she whispered when it was her turn to speak. The judge's voice was firm as he addressed them. "You took advantage of a vulnerable person. There's no excuse for your actions." Mike stood, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, Em. I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at him, the history we shared playing out in a flash before my eyes. "Sorry isn't enough, Mike. You chose this path." The gavel came down like the final word on the life I had once known. Mike and his parents were found guilty. Reparations were ordered, and they were to have no further contact with me. With the help of Anna and a dedicated team, I started physical therapy. Each small movement was a victory, each step a testament to my resilience. My legs, once lifeless, began to tingle with new strength. One day, as I managed to stand with the help of parallel bars, Anna cheered me on. "Look at you, Em, you're doing it!" The smile on my face was mirrored in her own. "I am, aren't I?" The joy bubbled up from a place I thought had been broken beyond repair. And so, I moved forward, one day at a time. The house, once a mausoleum of my past life, was slowly transformed back into a home, a sanctuary where I healed and grew stronger. My name is Emma. I'm 30 years old, and I work as a financial advisor. That's where I met David, my now ex-husband. I remember that day like it was yesterday. He walked into my office with a stack of papers and a troubled look on his face. "Emma, right?" he said, offering a handshake. "I'm David Caldwell. I heard you're the best in sorting out financial messes." "That's what they say," I replied, smiling. "Let's see what we can do about yours." David was tall, with short brown hair and eyes that seemed to smile even when he didn't. As I sifted through his documents, we started talking. It wasn't just about numbers and taxes. We talked about our favorite movies, music, and even debated over the best pizza in town. He had this easy way about him that made hours feel like minutes. "You know, I never thought sorting my finances would be this enjoyable," David admitted as we wrapped up. "Guess I have a magic touch," I joked. David laughed. "Would you like to grab a coffee sometime? My treat, for making this not as painful as I expected." That coffee turned into dinner, and dinners turned into weekend getaways. We were inseparable. After 6 months, David proposed, and without a moment's hesitation, I said yes. It was a whirlwind romance, but it felt right. Our wedding was simple yet beautiful. Standing there, exchanging vows, I thought I had found my forever. David's mom, Barbara, was there too. She was a stern-looking woman, but seemed happy for us. "You better give me grandkids soon," she whispered to me with a half-smile. Life as a married couple was blissful at first. David worked in real estate, and I continued at my firm. We shared dinners, movie nights, and long walks. We were a team, or so I thought. However, things began to change when the topic of children came up more frequently. It started with occasional remarks from Barbara, but soon became her constant demand. She would call and ask if I was pregnant yet, and during visits she'd say, "A grandchild would make this family complete." David always laughed it off. "Mom, give us some time," he'd say, but the pressure was building. At first, I tried to be understanding. After all, she was just an excited grandmother-to-be. But her persistence started to weigh on me. It was like our marriage wasn't enough without a child. "David, your mom needs to back off a bit," I said to him one evening. "I feel like she's more in our marriage than we are." David looked uncomfortable. "She's just excited, Emma. Let's not make a big deal out of it." As time went on, Barbara's influence in our life became more and more evident. It wasn't just about her constant nagging for grandchildren. She had opinions about everything, from how we should manage our finances to what we should eat. One Saturday morning, David and I were enjoying breakfast when his phone rang. It was Barbara. David put it on speaker, as he usually did. "David, dear, are you both eating healthy? Remember, a healthy diet is important for conceiving," she said in her usual authoritative tone. David chuckled. Yes, Mom, we're eating healthy. Don't worry. I forced a smile, but inside I was screaming. It felt like she was monitoring our every move. Things got more intense when Barbara started visiting us more frequently. One evening, she came over unannounced, carrying a stack of parenting books. Emma, you should start reading these. It's never too early to prepare, she said, dumping the books on the coffee table. I glanced at David, hoping he would say something, but he just shrugged. Thanks, Barbara. We'll look into them, I said, trying to sound grateful. Her visits became a regular occurrence. It was like she was keeping tabs on us, making sure we were doing everything right to have a child. And every time she brought up the topic, David would just nod and agree with her. One night, after another of Barbara's visits, I couldn't hold it in anymore. David, we need to talk, I said, frustration evident in my voice. What's up? He asked, not looking up from the TV. It's your mom. She's suffocating us with this baby talk. We barely have time to be a couple without her interference, I said. David finally looked at me. She's just excited, Emma. She means well. Excited or obsessed? I countered. It feels like she's the third person in our marriage. David sighed. She's my mom. What do you want me to do? Tell her to stop caring? It's not about caring, David. It's about respecting our space, our decisions. Can't you see that? David didn't respond. He just turned back to the TV, and that was the end of our conversation. But it wasn't the end of the issue. If anything, it only got worse. Barbara's visits became more frequent and her comments more intrusive. You two should go on a vacation. Just relax. It'll help with conception, she suggested one day. Maybe Emma should quit her job, reduce the stress, she said on another occasion. It felt like she was dictating our life, and David was letting her. I started feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. The love and understanding that had once bonded David and me seemed to be slipping away, lost in the shadow of Barbara's overbearing presence. The constant pressure about having a baby started to take its toll on both of us. David and I were arguing more often, and the romance that once filled our home seemed to have evaporated. Still, amidst all this, I held on to the hope that things would get better, that we'd find our way back to each other. But then came the day that changed everything. David came home late one evening, looking more downcast than usual. I was in the kitchen, trying to fix us a quick dinner. David, is everything okay? I asked, concerned. He slumped into a chair at the kitchen table, burying his face in his hands. We need to talk, Emma. That tone in his voice sent a chill down my spine. I sat across from him, my heart pounding. It's about us. Trying to have a baby, he started, not meeting my eyes. What about it? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. We went to the doctor, remember? For those tests? He said, finally looking up at me. I nodded. A few weeks ago, we had gone for a fertility checkup, hoping it would put Barbara's nagging to rest. David took a deep breath. The results came in today. It's not you, Emma. It's me. I felt a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and confusion. What do you mean? The doctor said I have a low sperm count. It's unlikely that I can father a child, he said, his voice breaking. I reached for his hand, trying to offer some comfort. David, it's okay. We can figure this out together. Maybe there's treatment or other options. He pulled his hand away, shaking his head. No, you don't understand. I won't go through any treatment. It's just not something I can do. I was stunned. But why? If there's a chance. It's my decision, Emma. I just can't, he said firmly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I loved, who always seemed so strong and confident, was giving up without even trying. David, please, don't let this come between us. We can work through it, I pleaded. He stood up, avoiding my gaze. I need some time alone to think about all this. And just like that, he walked out of the kitchen, leaving me sitting there, trying to process it all. I couldn't understand why he wouldn't even consider treatment. Was his pride more important than our chance to have a family? The next few days were like walking on eggshells. David barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was short and cold. I felt a growing distance between us, a crack in the foundation of our marriage that seemed to be widening with each passing day. Then came the day that turned the crack into a gaping hole. David had been out late again. I was in bed, pretending to be asleep when he came in. He thought I was asleep and started talking to someone on the phone. "Yes, Mom, I got the results. It's not good. No, I don't want treatment. I know, but I can't. Yes, I'll figure something out." Hearing him talk to his mom about something so personal, something he barely discussed with me, felt like a betrayal. It was clear that Barbara's shadow loomed larger over our marriage than I had ever realized. I lay there in the dark, tears streaming down my face, feeling utterly alone. Our marriage was crumbling, and I didn't know how to save it. Life at home had become unbearable. David and I were like strangers, living under the same roof. The love and warmth that once defined our relationship seemed like a distant memory. But just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, life threw me a curveball. I had been feeling under the weather for a few days. At first, I thought it was just stress, but then I missed my period. A part of me was scared to even entertain the thought, but I knew I had to find out. So, one morning, I bought a pregnancy test. Sitting in the bathroom, waiting for the result felt like the longest few minutes of my life. And then, there it was. A positive result. I was pregnant. For a moment, I was in disbelief. After all the talk about David's infertility, this felt like a miracle. A ray of hope in the midst of our crumbling marriage. But how would David react? I decided to tell him that evening. He came home late, as usual, and barely acknowledged me. I took a deep breath and approached him. "David, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. He looked up, his expression weary. "What is it now, Emma?" "I'm pregnant," I blurted out. For a moment, there was silence. Then he laughed, a bitter, cynical laugh. "Pregnant? How? According to the doctors, I can't." "I don't know, but the test is positive. We're going to have a baby," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. He stood up abruptly, anger flashing in his eyes. "This is some kind of joke, right? You're trying to trap me?" I was shocked. "Trap you? David, I'm telling you we're going to have a baby. Our baby." He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. "No, this can't be. You must have cheated. That's it, isn't it? You cheated on me." I felt like I had been slapped. "Cheated? How can you even say that? I've been nothing but faithful to you." He wasn't listening. He was too consumed by his own rage and disbelief. "Get out. I want you out of this house," he yelled. "David, please, let's talk about this. We can go to the doctor, get a confirmation," I pleaded. But it was like talking to a wall. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. That night, I slept in the guest room, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. The next day, David was gone before I woke up. His mother, Barbara, showed up instead. The look on her face was a mix of anger and disgust. "You should be ashamed of yourself, Emma, trapping my son with another man's child," she spat. "I didn't cheat on David. This child is his," I defended myself. She laughed, a cold, mocking laugh. "Do you take me for a fool? My son can't have children. You're just a gold digger, trying to secure your future." I was stunned by her cruelty. "This is David's child. I've never been with anyone else." She moved closer, her voice venomous. "You have 1 week to pack your things and leave. And don't even think about asking for alimony or child support. You won't get a dime from us." The ultimatum from Barbara was the last straw. I knew I couldn't continue living in a house filled with resentment and accusations. It was time to take control of my life, for my sake and for the baby's. First things first, I filed for divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. David and his mother tried to make it difficult. They wanted a piece of everything I had, claiming it was their right. But I had a strong case. Everything I owned, all my savings and property, were mine long before David entered my life. Their attempts to grab what wasn't theirs failed miserably. As for alimony, I didn't ask for a penny. I wanted no financial ties to David. No reason for him or his mother to interfere in my life again. I was determined to start anew, free from their toxicity. I found a modest apartment, not too fancy, but cozy enough to be a fresh start. Packing up my things from the house was bittersweet. Every photo, every piece of furniture had a memory attached to it, but I was ready to leave them behind. The day I moved out, David was conspicuously absent. Maybe he couldn't face me, or perhaps he just didn't care. Either way, it didn't matter. I left the keys on the counter and closed that chapter of my life. The first few nights in my new apartment were the hardest. The silence was overwhelming, and the reality of my situation often brought me to tears. But I found solace in the little life growing inside me. Talking to my unborn child became a nightly ritual, filling the emptiness with hope and love. Gradually, life in my new apartment started to feel less like a refuge and more like a home. I found comfort in my routine, and the bond with my unborn child grew stronger each day. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some old things, I found a photo of David and me from happier times. A pang of sadness hit me, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of relief. That chapter of my life was over. Then my phone rang. It was David. "Emma, I've received the divorce papers," he said, his voice emotionless. "I'm glad they reached you. Please take care of the formalities," I responded calmly. There was a pause before he added, "I won't bother you about the baby. You won't hear from me again." It was a cold goodbye, but it was closure. As I hung up, I realized that in my solitude, I had found an inner strength I never knew I had. I was ready to face the future, not as David's estranged wife, but as a strong, independent woman and a loving mother. It was a quiet evening, and I was sitting on the couch, browsing through a magazine while Jacob, my 4-year-old son, played with his toys on the floor. The peace was interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. Puzzled, I went to answer it, wondering who it could be at this hour. Standing there was a woman I barely recognized, but her eyes held a familiar sorrow. "Hi, Emma. It's been a long time," she said hesitantly. It took me a moment, but then I recognized her as Linda, a friend I had known through my ex-husband. "Linda, yes, it has been. What brings you here?" She shifted uncomfortably, looking past me at Jacob, who was now peeking around my legs. "I thought you should know about David." David. Just hearing his name after all these years sent a chill down my spine. "What about him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Linda sighed. "He's not doing well, Emma. After you left, things went downhill for him. He became an alcoholic. He remarried a few years ago and had a child, but the boy was born with disabilities. David couldn't handle it. He left them, divorced his wife, and now he's refusing to pay child support. He's in legal trouble." The news hit me hard, but not in the way Linda might have expected. I felt a deep sadness, not for David, but for his child and the woman he had left behind. "That's terrible," I said softly. Linda nodded. "I thought you should know. Given your past with him." I appreciated her concern, but knew I had to set boundaries. "Thank you for telling me, Linda, but that part of my life is over. David made his choices, and they have nothing to do with me or my son." Linda looked at Jacob, then back at me. "I understand, Emma. I just thought—" I smiled, albeit a little sadly. "I appreciate it, Linda, but my focus is on Jacob and our life now. What David does or doesn't do isn't my concern anymore." She nodded, seemingly understanding. "I hope you and Jacob are happy, Emma. You both deserve it." "Thank you, we are." I glanced at Jacob, who was now fully engrossed in his toys again. "And I intend to keep it that way." After Linda left, I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, taking deep breaths. The past had a way of sneaking up on you, but I was determined not to let it overshadow the life I had built for myself and my son. The park was vibrant that day, with laughter and the sounds of children playing. I was there with Jacob, my heart swelling with pride as I watched him run around. Then, a familiar, unwelcome voice sliced through the air. "Emma, is that you?" I turned, my heart sinking. Barbara, my former mother-in-law, was approaching, her eyes fixed on Jacob. "Barbara?" I said coolly. "What are you doing here?" Ignoring my tone, her gaze was locked on Jacob. "He's grown so much. He's your son, right?" "Yes, this is Jacob," I answered, moving subtly to stand between her and my son. Barbara's eyes sparkled with a disturbing kind of eagerness. "I was hoping to see him. After all, he's my grandson." I felt a wave of anger. "And why would you want to see him?" "Well, you know, my other grandson." She trailed off, her face twisting. "He's not." Well, he's sick. It's just not the same. I want to be part of a healthy grandchild's life. Her words struck me like a slap. The contempt in her voice for her own grandchild was appalling. "Barbara," I said, my voice steely, "you have no right to be part of Jacob's life. Not after everything that happened." "But Emma, that was all David's doing," she protested. I shook my head. "You supported him. You turned against me when I was carrying your grandchild. And now you speak with such disgust about your other grandson just because he's sick. That's unforgivable." Barbara's face reddened. "You can't keep me away from my grandson." "I can, and I will," I declared firmly. "Jacob doesn't need someone in his life who values people based on their health. He will not be part of your twisted view of family." She looked like she was about to argue, but I cut her off. "This conversation is over. Stay away from us, Barbara. Your presence is neither wanted nor welcomed." I took Jacob's hand and walked away, leaving Barbara standing alone, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. As we walked, Jacob looked up at me, his innocent eyes filled with questions. "Mommy, who was that lady?" "That was someone we used to know, sweetheart," I replied gently, "but she's not part of our lives anymore." Sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky with warm colors, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Jacob was inside, his laughter echoing as he played. Life had settled into a calm rhythm, the storms of the past now distant memories. "Mom, look what I made." Jacob's voice pulled me back from my thoughts. He came running out, holding a drawing in his hands. It was a picture of the two of us, smiling under a big, bright sun. "It's beautiful, Jacob," I said, pulling him into a hug. "You're quite the artist." He beamed with pride. "I want to put it on the fridge." "Let's do that," I smiled, following him inside. As we walked, I thought about how far we'd come. There was a time when the weight of the past felt crushing, but now it seemed like a distant echo. Later that evening, after Jacob was asleep, I sat down with a cup of tea, reflecting on everything. The phone rang, disrupting the quiet. I hesitated but decided to answer it. "Hello?" It was my sister Anna. "Hey Emma, I just wanted to check in. How are you and Jacob doing?" "We're doing well, Anna. Jacob's growing up so fast," I replied, a smile in my voice. "I heard about your run-in with Barbara." "Are you okay?" she asked, concern lacing her words. I sighed. "Yeah, it was unexpected, but I'm okay. It's just a reminder of the past." "I know it's tough, but you've come so far, Emma. You're strong, and you've built a wonderful life for you and Jacob," she said encouragingly. Her words warmed my heart. "Thanks, Anna. It means a lot." We talked for a while longer, about small things, everyday life. It was comforting, this connection with my sister, a reminder of the support system I had. After hanging up, I went to the living room where Jacob's drawing was displayed on the fridge. Looking at it, I realized how much we had both grown. The pain and anger of the past had faded, leaving room for healing and new beginnings. I walked to Jacob's room, watching him sleep peacefully. Leaning down, I kissed his forehead gently. "Good night, my little artist," I whispered. Back on the porch, I gazed at the stars emerging in the night sky. The echoes of the past were fading, their hold on me loosening. In their place was hope, a quiet strength, and the unconditional love between a mother and her son. The first time I laid eyes on Michael was at a college seminar. We were both there for extra credits, though our paths were quite different. He was a business major while I was pursuing literature. I was drawn to him from the moment he raised his hand and posed a challenging question to the professor. After class, we found ourselves at the same coffee shop, and from there, it just seemed like the universe wanted us to be together. We chatted about everything, from college, hobbies, to our childhood memories. "I come from a pretty strict background," he mentioned, taking a sip from his cup. "My parents are deeply religious." I remember shrugging. "So? My parents are free thinkers. They always taught me to question everything." Michael laughed. "Sounds like we're from different planets." But despite our differences, there was an undeniable chemistry. We began to see each other more frequently, studying together and exploring the city during the weekends. About 2 years into our relationship, we decided to move in together. It was a practical decision. Our apartments were far from the university, and sharing a place made sense. Plus, we were inseparable by then. However, when Michael broke the news to his parents, it wasn't received well. At a dinner at their house, Mrs. Davis, Michael's mother, was the first to voice her concerns. Living together before marriage? Michael, you know how we feel about that. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mom, times have changed. It's not a big deal. Mr. Davis chimed in. In our house it is. You're living in sin. I could feel the weight of their stares. Wanting to ease the tension, I said, We respect your beliefs, but this is our decision. We're adults. Mrs. Davis sighed. It's just not the way we raised you. Michael took my hand. Lizzie and I love each other. We want to start our life together, and I hope you can support that. The evening ended on a somber note, but Michael and I were firm in our decision. We found a cozy apartment close to campus and moved in. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Our bond grew stronger, but the strain with his parents was always in the background, like an old radio playing a sad tune. One evening, as we were settling into our new life, there was a knock on the door. It was Mrs. Davis, holding a pie. I thought I'd come by and see how you two are doing, she said, looking around with a critical eye. We're doing great, Mrs. Davis, I replied, trying to be cordial. She sat down, placing the pie on the table. This is all temporary, right? You'll get married soon? Michael cleared his throat. We haven't decided that yet, Mom. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the constant pressure from Michael's parents started to weigh on us. Our once carefree dates and movie nights began to have a shadow, the looming expectation of marriage. One evening, while we were making dinner together in our tiny kitchen, Michael broached the subject. Lizzie, have you ever thought about, having a wedding? I looked up from chopping the vegetables, surprised. Like, for us? Are you proposing? He smiled awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. Not exactly. I mean, yes, I want to marry you someday, but right now, it's more about my parents. Maybe if we had a ceremony, they'd back off? I sighed. So you're saying a wedding without the legal paperwork? He nodded. Just a thought. We can invite friends, make it a fun day. My parents get their wedding, and we get some peace. It wasn't the romantic proposal I'd imagined, but I understood his reasoning. All right, I said slowly. But on one condition, we do it our way. No big church wedding, just something small and intimate. Michael grinned, relief evident on his face. Deal. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparations. We chose a beautiful outdoor venue, invited our close friends and family, and planned a simple but heartfelt ceremony. When we broke the news to his parents, their reaction was surprisingly subdued. An outdoor wedding? Mrs. Davis asked, raising an eyebrow. Well, it's unconventional, but if it means you two are taking the next step, I suppose we can support it. Mr. Davis added, As long as you're committed to each other, that's what matters. The day of the wedding was sunny and bright. I wore a simple white dress, and Michael looked dashing in his suit. Our friends cheered, and even Michael's parents seemed genuinely happy. During the reception, Mrs. Davis pulled me aside. Lizzie, I want to apologize, she began, her voice soft. I know we've been hard on you two, but seeing you together today, I realize that love is what truly matters. I smiled, touched by her words. Thank you, Mrs. Davis. That means a lot. The day ended on a high note, with everyone dancing and celebrating our love. It felt like we had finally won Michael's parents over, and I hoped this would be a fresh start for us. But as days passed, their daily visits began. They'd drop by unannounced, often with unsolicited advice or thinly veiled criticisms. It was as if the wedding had given them a free pass to interfere in our lives. One evening, as Michael and I were unwinding after a long day, there was a knock at the door. Opening it, I found Mrs. Davis holding a casserole dish. Just thought I'd drop off some dinner, she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Thanks, I replied, taking the dish. But you don't have to do this. She waved a hand dismissively. It's no trouble. I just thought, since you're always so busy, you might not have time to cook. I forced a smile, sensing the underlying judgment. We manage, but thanks anyway. As the door closed, I sighed deeply. Michael wrapped an arm around me. "It'll be okay," he whispered. It started with the subtle comments, the not-so-innocent questions. "Why is the house so messy?" Or, "Have you considered cooking something more nutritious?" Mrs. Davis would ask, her tone dripping with faux concern. One day, I came home from work, exhausted, to find her in our living room, reorganizing our bookshelves. "Mrs. Davis, what are you doing?" I asked, taken aback. She looked up, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Just thought I'd help tidy up a bit. These shelves looked so cluttered." Michael entered from the kitchen, holding 2 cups of tea. "Mom's just helping out, Lizzie," he said, trying to play mediator. I took a deep breath, my patience waning. "This is our home, Michael. We didn't ask for help." Mrs. Davis pursed her lips, her eyes watering. "I'm just trying to be helpful. After all, now we're family." Days like these became more frequent. They'd pop by without notice, giving advice we never asked for, criticizing decisions we'd made together as a couple. It was clear they no longer saw boundaries. One evening, after a particularly trying visit from his parents, Michael and I sat down for a heart-to-heart. "Michael, this has to stop," I began, my voice trembling with frustration. "I can't live like this, feeling like I'm constantly being judged in my own home." He ran his fingers through his hair, looking equally stressed. "I know, Lizzie. It's just, they're my parents. I don't know how to tell them to back off without hurting their feelings." I replied, "But what about our feelings? Our peace of mind? We can't keep sacrificing that for them." A week later, we invited them over for dinner, deciding to address the issue head-on. The evening started off pleasantly enough. We chatted about work, friends, and the latest news. But as the main course was served, I took a deep breath and dove in. "Mrs. Davis, Mr. Davis, we invited you over because there's something we need to discuss," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Mr. Davis looked up, his fork pausing mid-air. "What's the matter?" I exchanged a glance with Michael, who nodded in encouragement. "It's about the frequent visits and, well, the constant input on our lives." Mrs. Davis looked taken aback. "We're just trying to help." Michael took over. "Mom, Dad, we appreciate that you care, but it's becoming overwhelming. We need some space to live our lives, make our mistakes, and grow together." Tears formed in Mrs. Davis's eyes. "After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" Mr. Davis added, his voice stern. "We're just looking out for you. It seems Lizzie here doesn't appreciate family." I felt a pang of guilt, but stood my ground. It's not about appreciation. It's about respect, respecting our boundaries and our choices. The room grew silent, the tension palpable. Mrs. Davis dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, her shoulders shaking. "We just wanted to be part of your lives. I never thought it'd come to this." Michael looked torn, his loyalty divided, but he held firm. "Mom, we love you, but this is our life. We need you to understand that." The evening ended with Mrs. Davis in tears, Mr. Davis looking disappointed, and an unspoken agreement that things had to change. As they left, I felt a mix of relief and dread, wondering what the future held for our relationships. Days after the confrontation, the house felt unusually quiet. The constant visits had stopped, but the silence was both a relief and a curse. Every time the doorbell rang or there was a knock, my heart would race, expecting it to be Michael's parents. But it never was. One evening, as Michael and I sat on our couch, he broached the topic. "Lizzie, do you think we were too harsh? I mean, they're my parents. Maybe we overreacted?" I took his hand, feeling its warmth. "Michael, it's not about being harsh. It's about setting boundaries. We did what we had to do." He sighed deeply. "I know, it's just hard. I never imagined being in this situation with them." As days turned into weeks, we began to feel the weight of our decision. There were no more surprise visits, but there were also no calls or messages. It was as if we had cut ties completely. During this period, I often found solace in browsing property listings online. One day, as I was scrolling through, a beautiful house in a neighboring town caught my eye. It had a large garden, a spacious living area, and most importantly, it was far away from our current life. "Michael, come look at this," I called out. He joined me, peering at the screen. "Wow, it's beautiful. But why are you looking at houses?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I was thinking, maybe it's time for a fresh start, somewhere new, where we can create our own memories, away from all this drama. He looked surprised. "You mean move? Leave everything behind?" I nodded. "It's drastic, I know, but maybe it's what we need." We discussed it at length, weighing the pros and cons. The idea of starting anew was enticing, but also terrifying. Yet, the more we talked, the more it felt right. A few weeks later, we visited the house. It was even more beautiful in person, and the neighborhood seemed perfect. After much consideration, I decided to use the money I had inherited from my grandmother to buy it. The day we signed the papers, I felt a mix of emotions. Excitement for the new beginning, but also sadness for what we were leaving behind. The move went smoothly, and soon we were settling into our new home. It felt like a dream. The peace and quiet were just what we needed. One evening, as we were enjoying a quiet dinner in our new dining room, Michael said, "Lizzie, I think this was the best decision we ever made." I smiled, feeling content. I think so too. The first few months in our new home were like a dream. The mornings were quiet, filled with the chirping of birds, and the evenings brought a calm, tranquil energy. Michael and I fell into a comfortable routine, enjoying the privacy and peace that our new surroundings provided. The past seemed like a distant memory, and the tension that once surrounded our lives had all but disappeared. Until one fateful day. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when the doorbell rang. Michael went to answer it. I heard murmurs, and then a familiar voice. My heart sank. It was Mrs. Davis. I walked to the entrance, my face revealing my shock. There they were, Mrs. and Mr. Davis, suitcases in tow, standing at our doorstep. "Mom? Dad? What are you doing here?" Michael asked, his voice filled with surprise. Mrs. Davis smiled, a bit too sweetly. "We missed you, dear, and we thought, why not pay a visit?" I tried to keep my composure. "It's unexpected." Mr. Davis chimed in. "We just wanted to see where our son is living now. Is that so wrong?" Michael seemed torn. "Of course not, but a heads up would have been nice." Mrs. Davis looked around, her eyes scanning our home. "Oh, what a lovely place you have here. Much nicer than the old one." I bristled but said nothing. The visit turned into a stay. One night became 2, then 3. They began to settle in, making themselves comfortable, much like they had in our previous home. One evening, after dinner, I pulled Michael aside. "Michael, we can't go down this road again. We moved to escape this." He sighed. "I know, Lizzie, but they're my parents. I can't just throw them out." "Then what? Let them take over our lives again?" Mrs. Davis, who seemed to have overheard our conversation, walked over, her eyes welling up with tears. "Is that how you feel, Michael? That we're a burden?" Michael looked helplessly at me, then back at his mother. "Mom, it's not like that. We just wish you had told us you were coming." She sniffled. "We just wanted to be close to our son, but it seems we're not welcome here either." I had a sinking feeling when I heard Michael's parents mention they'd made a decision about their living situation. The two of us had recently been discussing the matter privately, hoping to find a delicate way to address the issue. Now, it seemed the matter was going to be thrust into the open. "Lizzie, Michael," Mr. Davis began, "we have some news." Michael shifted in his seat, already sensing what was coming. "Go on," he prompted. Mrs. Davis, trying to sound cheerful, said, "We've sold our house. We realize there's no need for it when we have such a lovely family home here with you two." My eyes widened in shock. "You did what?" "We wanted to be closer to you both," Mr. Davis explained, looking earnest. Mrs. Davis looked hurt. "We are family. Why wouldn't you want us here?" I took a deep breath and said what I'd wanted to say for a long time. "This house, it's mine. It's not owned jointly by Michael and me. It's in my name only." I retrieved a file from the study, showing them the ownership documents. Mrs. Davis looked at the papers and then back at me, clearly stunned. But you're married. What's yours is Michael's and vice versa. I smiled triumphantly. That's where you're mistaken. We held a wedding ceremony, yes, but Michael and I never legally married. We never signed any official documents, so technically, you're not my in-laws. The weight of my words seemed to hang in the air. Mrs. Davis's face turned a shade paler, her eyes widening in disbelief. Mr. Davis looked from me to Michael, seeking some form of denial. Michael took my hand, signaling his support. It's true, Mom and Dad. We thought you'd be more accepting if we had a ceremony, but we never felt the need to get the state involved in our relationship. Mrs. Davis began to sob. So, you deceived us? And now you're throwing us out? The room was heavy with tension after the bombshells were dropped. Michael's parents were clearly taken aback, but it wasn't long before the shock turned into outrage. So, you tricked everyone with a sham wedding? And you think that makes everything all right? Mrs. Davis's voice had a hint of venom. Michael sighed. It wasn't about tricking anyone. It was about the way we wanted to live our lives. The ceremony was for us, and those who wanted to celebrate our love. Mrs. Davis's face turned a shade redder. You dare defy the sanctity of marriage, live together in sin, and then mock us with a fake wedding. I've had enough, Mr. Davis declared, standing up suddenly. You young lady are nothing but a sinner and a witch, trying to pull my son away from his family, his values. I was taken aback by the fierceness of their reaction, but I wouldn't let them intimidate me. I have not taken Michael from anyone. He's made his own choices, and it's high time you respect them. Mrs. Davis's eyes were filled with tears, but her voice was stern. Michael, come home with us. Leave this woman. She's done nothing but pull you into her web of deceit. Michael, ever the calm in the storm, replied, Mom, Dad, I love you both, but my place is here, with her. She's been nothing but kind and understanding, even when you both haven't been. You can't just demand I leave her. You're choosing her over us? Mr. Davis's voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. I'm choosing to live my life on my terms, Michael asserted. The room went silent for what felt like an eternity. The air was thick, every breath heavy. Mrs. Davis's face was a mask of hurt and betrayal. Very well, she said, her voice cold. But remember this, you're turning your back on your family, on your faith, all for her. I'm not turning my back on anyone, Michael said. I just wish you'd see that. Mrs. Davis's eyes were hard, her voice bitter. Let's go, she said to her husband, not giving either of us another glance. And with that, they left, leaving behind a wake of hurt, confusion, and uncertainty. I looked at Michael, his face a mirror of my own feelings. We both knew that things had changed irrevocably, and there was no going back. A few days after the confrontation, as I was heading back from work, my neighbor, Mrs. Carlson, called out to me. She was an older lady, known for her daily walks and her uncanny ability to know everyone's business. Did you hear about the Davis family not selling their house? She asked with a knowing look. I paused, taken aback. What do you mean? She leaned closer, lowering her voice. They never put their house on the market. I heard from Susan, who heard from Janice, who works at the town's real estate office. There's no record of the Davis property being up for sale. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Were they lying to us all this time? When I got home, I shared the information with Michael. He looked shocked. I can't believe they'd lie to us. What were they trying to achieve? We both knew the answer. They wanted to manipulate the situation to their advantage. The realization was a hard pill to swallow. All this time, while we tried to understand and accommodate them, they had been playing a game. Michael sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. This changes things. It's one thing to have disagreements, but outright deception? That's something else entirely. We can't keep letting them pull us into their manipulative games, I said firmly. We need boundaries, strong ones. Michael nodded. You're right. We can't continue like this. It's unhealthy for us and for our relationship. The next day, he went over to his parents' house. He needed to confront them, get some answers. When he returned, his face was a mix of anger and sadness. "They admitted it," he began, his voice heavy. "They thought that if they moved in with us, we'd be a proper family again. They felt threatened by our independence." We sat down, discussing our next steps. It was clear that for our own sanity and the health of our relationship, we needed distance from them. "We need a break," Michael declared. "Some time away from all this drama and manipulation." I agreed. "It's the best decision for us right now." That evening, we sent a message to his parents, informing them of our decision. The reply was filled with anger and accusations, but we remained firm. We needed this, for ourselves and for our future. The next few weeks were quiet. We focused on each other, rebuilding the trust and closeness that had been strained over the past months. One evening, as we sat on our porch, looking at the stars, Michael turned to me. "Thank you," he whispered, "for standing by me, for fighting for us." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "Always." The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but it was a poignant reminder of the importance of boundaries, honesty, and mutual respect in any relationship. As the night deepened, we looked towards the future, hoping for peace and understanding. I'm Emily, 35, and if you'd asked me a few years ago, I'd have told you my life was just about perfect. I was climbing the corporate ladder at a renowned company, making my way to a department manager position. It was during those long hours at work that I stumbled upon something unexpected, something that wasn't part of my meticulously planned career path. Love. His name was Jake, a colleague from a different department. He wasn't as high up on the career ladder as I was, but that never mattered to me. Our connection was instant, and before we knew it, our office romance blossomed into something deeper, leading us down the aisle. The company we worked for was supportive. After all, it wasn't a secret affair, but a serious relationship that everyone could see was genuine. We were happy, living in a beautiful, spacious house that we bought together. It was more than a home. It was a symbol of our future, of the family we dreamed of starting. But our seemingly perfect life wasn't without its cracks. The main issue? Our earnings. I always earned more than Jake, and while it never bothered me, it was a thorn in his side. One chilly evening, as we sat in our living room, Jake brought it up yet again. Does it ever get to you? The whole money thing?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the fireplace. "No, Jake, it really doesn't. I love you, not your paycheck. We're in this together, remember?" I replied, trying to reassure him. He let out a long sigh. "I just feel like I should be the one bringing in more, you know? It's not traditional." I reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "We're not a traditional couple, Jake. We make our own rules. We're happy, aren't we?" He nodded, but his eyes didn't mirror the conviction in his voice. The topic was a recurring one, resurfacing every now and then, each time leaving a faint but lingering unease in the air. Life has a way of throwing you off course when you least expect it. That's exactly what happened to me, Emily, on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday. It was supposed to be a routine medical checkup, nothing more. I sat there in the sterile doctor's office, fidgeting with the hem of my shirt, waiting for the usual all clear. Instead, what I got was a jolt that turned my world upside down. The doctor, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, had a serious look as she delivered the news. "Emily, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you have cancer," she said gently. For a moment, everything stood still. The word cancer echoed in my head like a dreadful bell. Fear, disbelief, a sense of unreality washed over me. What? Are you sure?" I managed to stammer, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. The doctor nodded, her expression empathetic. "I understand this is a lot to take in. We need to discuss your treatment options." Her voice faded into the background as I grappled with the shock. Cancer? Me? It didn't make sense. I was healthy, or so I thought. When I left the doctor's office, I felt like I was in a daze. The world seemed to go on around me, but I was stuck in that moment of devastating revelation. I called Jake as soon as I could. He answered after a few rings. "Hey Em, how did the checkup go?" His voice was casual, expecting routine news. "Jake, it's not good," I said, my voice shaky. "What's wrong? Talk to me, Em." he replied, his tone shifting to concern. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It's cancer, Jakey. I have cancer. There was a heavy silence on the other end. Then, oh God, Em, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Where are you? I'm still at the clinic. I'm not okay, Jakey. I'm scared, I admitted, feeling a lump forming in my throat. I'll come right over. We'll face this together, Em. You're not alone, he said firmly. Hearing his words, a small flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe, just maybe, we could get through this nightmare together. The following days were a blur of appointments, tests, and consultations. I started my treatment, which included chemotherapy. It was exhausting, both physically and emotionally. Jake was supportive at first, accompanying me to my sessions, holding my hand, trying to be strong for both of us. But as the treatments took a toll on me, I noticed a change in Jake. His visits became less frequent. His reassurances felt more forced. Whenever I asked him why he couldn't come, he always had the same excuse. Work is just crazy right now, Em. I'm so tired by the end of the day, he'd say over the phone. I tried to understand, to be sympathetic. After all, he was dealing with this in his own way, too. But deep down, I couldn't shake off the feeling of growing distance, the creeping sense of loneliness that started to envelop me. In those moments of solitude and struggle, I found an unexpected source of strength. My parents and my best friend, Lisa. They were my rocks, calling me daily, visiting me whenever they could, offering words of encouragement and love. While I was trying to adjust to my new reality in the hospital, undergoing treatment and dealing with the side effects, life outside continued. I missed our home, the comfort of our bed, the little rituals Jake and I had. Despite his decreasing visits, I clung to the hope that we were still a team. One day, Lisa came to visit. She brought some magazines, my favorite snacks, and a sense of normalcy that I craved. But there was something off about her. She seemed uneasy. Hey, what's up? You seem a bit distracted, I said, trying to read her expression. Lisa hesitated before speaking. Emily, I don't want to worry you, but something strange happened the other day. My heart skipped a beat. What happened? Well, I was walking past your house, and I heard laughter. Loud, female laughter. It sounded like there was a party or something, she said cautiously. A cold shiver ran down my spine. A party? But Jake didn't mention anything. Maybe he had friends over. Lisa bit her lip, looking uncomfortable. I don't know, Emily. It just felt weird. And I haven't seen Jake around much lately. I'm worried there might be someone else. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I didn't want to believe it, but the seeds of doubt were planted. Was Jake seeing someone else while I was stuck here, fighting for my life? I need to know, Lisa. I can't just sit here wondering, I said, a sense of urgency rising within me. I understand, but what are you going to do? Lisa asked, her concern evident. I need to go home. I need to see for myself, I decided, my mind made up. But Emily, your treatment. I know, but I can't ignore this. I have to know the truth, I interrupted, feeling a mix of anger, betrayal, and fear. Lisa helped me arrange for an early discharge. The doctors weren't thrilled, but my recent results were promising, and they agreed under the condition that I would continue my treatment on an outpatient basis. The drive home was nerve-wracking. Every possible scenario played out in my mind. I was scared of what I might find, yet I needed answers. As we pulled up to the house, everything looked normal from the outside. But the moment we stepped in, it was clear something was off. The place felt different, like it wasn't ours anymore. We heard voices coming from the living room. My heart pounded in my chest as we walked in, bracing for what we might find. To my utter shock, there was a couple sitting there, looking as surprised to see us as we were to see them. Who are you? What are you doing in my house? I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The woman, probably in her late 30s, stood up. I'm sorry, but who are you? We're renting this place. Renting? This is my house. I live here with my husband, Jake, I said, struggling to process her words. The man, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. We've been here for a couple of weeks. We made a deal with Jake. He said the house was going to be sold, and we're interested in buying it. My world came crashing down at that moment. Not only was there another woman in my house, but now I was being told that my husband, the man I trusted, was planning to sell our home without my knowledge. I felt like I was in a nightmare, one that I couldn't wake up from. As I stood in the living room of what was once a symbol of our shared dreams, the couple who had unwittingly walked into this mess looked at me with a mix of confusion and pity. They introduced themselves as Mark and Sandra, clearly uncomfortable but trying to be polite. I could hardly focus on their words. My mind was in turmoil. "Please, can you call Jake? I need to speak to him," I said, my voice shaky but firm. Mark nodded, taking out his phone. "Of course, I have his number. He said to call if we needed anything." The wait for Jake to arrive was agonizing. My heart raced with a cocktail of emotions: anger, betrayal, disbelief. When he finally walked in, the look on his face was one of shock, but not the kind I expected. "Emily, what are you doing here? You should be in the hospital," he said, his voice tinged not with concern, but annoyance. His reaction only fueled my anger. "What am I doing here? Jake, what are you doing? Selling our house behind my back?" He had the audacity to look irritated. "I can explain, Emily. It's simple, really." "Explain? Explain how you could betray me like this?" My voice was rising despite my efforts to control it. Jake's expression hardened. "Listen, Emily, you're sick. The cancer might not even go away. I have to think about my life too. I can't be tied down, waiting for whatever comes next." I felt like I had been slapped. His words were cruel, unrecognizable from the man I thought I knew. "You're talking about selling our home, our life together, as if it's just a transaction. Is this really you, Jake?" Disbelief and hurt were evident in my voice. He shrugged, a cold look in his eyes. "It's practical, Emily. You're not going to make it, and I need the money to build my life. Besides, I would get this house anyway if you know." His words were like a knife twisting in my gut. The reality of his betrayal was worse than any suspicion I had harbored. "I can't believe you, Jake. After everything, this is what it comes down to. Money and convenience?" I was struggling to hold back tears. Jake seemed unfazed. "Life goes on, Emily. Yours might not, but mine will. I need to think about my future." His brazenness left me speechless. I had imagined many scenarios, but nothing could have prepared me for the callousness I was witnessing. "And you think you'll just get away with this? Selling our house? Leaving me with nothing while I'm fighting for my life?" My voice trembled with a mixture of rage and pain. He shrugged again, a gesture that now filled me with revulsion. "I'm doing what I have to. You can do whatever you want, Emily. It doesn't matter to me anymore." I felt a surge of resolve amidst the chaos of my emotions. "I'll fight you on this, Jake, and the company will hear about how you treat your sick wife. You won't get away with this," he scoffed. "Do what you want, Emily. I'm done here." With that, he turned and left, leaving a trail of coldness behind. I stood there, shaken to my core, realizing that the man I loved was a stranger to me now. I knew at that moment that this was a battle I had to fight, not just for my health, but for justice and dignity. After Jake left, a heavy silence filled the room. Mark and Sandra stood awkwardly, clearly wanting to escape the tense atmosphere. I couldn't blame them. "Look, I'm really sorry about all this. We had no idea," Mark said, sounding genuinely apologetic. "Yeah, we just wanted a place to stay. We didn't know about everything," Sandra added, her eyes full of sympathy. I gave them a weak smile. "It's not your fault. You were just looking for a home." They offered to leave, but I insisted they stay. It wasn't their fault that Jake had dragged them into his deceit. After they left, I sat down on the couch, my mind racing. I felt betrayed, angry, and helpless. But amidst all those emotions, a fiery determination was taking shape. I wasn't going to let Jake walk all over me. The next morning, I called my lawyer and explained everything. He was shocked, but promised to help me fight this. "Don't worry, Emily. We'll make sure he doesn't get away with this," he assured me. I felt a small glimmer of hope. With my lawyer's help, I would fight for what was rightfully mine. Next, I knew I had to confront Jake at work. It wasn't going to be easy, but I needed to face him. I wanted him to know that I wasn't going to back down. I arrived at the office, my heart pounding. As I walked through the halls, I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me. They knew something was up. I knocked on Jake's office door and pushed it open without waiting for a response. Jake looked up, his face a mask of surprise and annoyance. "Emily, what are you doing here?" "I'm here to tell you that I know everything. And I'm not going to let you get away with it," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Jake scoffed. "What are you going to do? You're sick, Emily. You should be resting, not causing a scene." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I've spoken to my lawyer. We're going to fight you on the house, and I'm going to tell the bosses about what you've done." Jake's face hardened. "You think you can scare me? Go ahead, tell them, see if I care." I met his gaze squarely. "I'm not trying to scare you, Jake. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. You can't just throw me away because I'm sick." Jake leaned back in his chair, a smug look on his face. "You really think you can win this? I'm not the bad guy here, Emily. I'm just trying to move on with my life." I felt a surge of anger. By selling our home? By leaving me with nothing? Jake shrugged. "Life is tough, Emily. You should know that better than anyone." I shook my head, disgusted. "I can't even recognize you anymore, Jake. You're not the man I married." Jake's expression didn't change. "Maybe you never really knew me at all." With that, I turned and walked out of his office. I had said what I needed to say. Now it was time to fight. In the days that followed, my life turned into a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings, and strategy sessions. My health was improving, but my battle was far from over. With each passing day, I gathered more evidence to support my claim to the house. My larger financial contribution was a strong point in my favor, and I was determined to see this through. My lawyer was optimistic. "Emily, you have a solid case. The numbers don't lie. And given the circumstances, it's unlikely a judge will side with Jake," he assured me over the phone. The relief I felt was palpable. "Thank you," I replied. "I appreciate your help more than you know." "We're not there yet, but things are looking up," he cautioned. I understood. The legal world was unpredictable. But for the first time in a while, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. At work, the atmosphere was tense. My confrontation with Jake had become office gossip. Some colleagues whispered in corners, others offered quiet support. It was uncomfortable, but I couldn't let it distract me. I decided to meet with our bosses and lay everything out. It was a tough conversation, but necessary. I told them about Jake's betrayal, the house, everything. They listened, their faces a mixture of shock and empathy. "We're so sorry, Emily. This is unacceptable," one of them said. "The situation with Jake will be dealt with. This behavior can't be tolerated," the other added. Hearing their support was a relief. I didn't have to face Jake at work anymore. Days later, they called to tell me they had let Jake go. His actions didn't align with the company's values. It was a small victory, but it meant the world to me. My health was on the upswing. The treatments were working, and my doctors were hopeful. It was a glimmer of hope in a sea of chaos. One evening, as I sat in my small rental, contemplating my next steps, my phone rang. It was Jake. I hesitated but answered. "Emily, please, we need to talk." He sounded desperate. "What's there to talk about, Jake?" I asked, my voice firm. "I was wrong. I've been fired. I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't think it would come to this," he said, almost pleading. I took a deep breath. "You hurt me, Jake. Deeply. I can't just forget that." "I know, I regret it. Can we find a way to settle this without going to court?" he asked, sounding beaten. After a short pause, I replied, "I will not back down. Never." There was silence on the other end. "I understand. I'll have my lawyer contact yours," he finally said. Jake's call didn't change anything. He had shown his true colors, and there was no going back. I was a different person now, stronger and more determined. After the dust settled with the house and my divorce, I found myself standing at the beginning of a new chapter. It was a strange feeling, like stepping into the unknown after a long, turbulent journey. My health was improving, but the road to full recovery was still ahead of me. One afternoon, I was at the clinic for a checkup. The waiting room was quiet, just the hum of the air conditioner filling the space. When the nurse called my name, I followed her to the examination room. Dr. Simmons, my oncologist, greeted me with a warm smile. "Good to see you, Emily. How are you feeling?" Better, thank you, I replied, taking a seat. That's what we like to hear, he said, going over my chart. Your latest scans show improvement. The treatment is working. I exhaled a sigh of relief. That's great news. Yes, but remember, it's a long road. You need to take care of yourself, he reminded me. I know, and I will, I assured him. He nodded, satisfied. Good. We'll keep monitoring your progress. Leaving the clinic, I felt a mix of emotions. Hope, certainly, but also a sense of responsibility. This was my life, and I had to take charge of it. Back at work, I threw myself into my projects. It was a distraction, but also a reminder that I had a purpose beyond my illness and personal troubles. One day, I was in the break room when I overheard a couple of colleagues talking. Did you hear about Jake? He's trying to get his job back, one of them said. Really? After what he did? Good luck with that, the other replied. I stayed silent, stirring my coffee. Jake's choices were his own. I had my path to follow, and it didn't include him. After work, I met up with my friend Sarah for dinner. She had been a rock throughout everything. How are you holding up? She asked as we sat down. I'm okay, taking it one day at a time, I answered. That's all you can do, and hey, you're doing amazing, she said, offering a reassuring smile. I nodded. Thanks, I couldn't have done it without your support. We're in this together, she said, raising her glass. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, I echoed, clinking my glass with hers. The next few months were a blend of routine and small victories. Each doctor's visit brought good news. My strength was returning, and with it, a newfound determination to live life on my terms. The treatments had worked, and the doctors were optimistic. I was officially in remission. As I walked into the office that morning, I felt a sense of pride. I had not only kept my job through the toughest times, but also excelled. My team greeted me with warm smiles and congratulations. The workday was busy, but I didn't mind. Being productive gave me a sense of normalcy. Later, I met Sarah for lunch. She had been more than a friend. She was my pillar of strength. You look radiant, Emily, she said as we sat down at our favorite cafe. I feel it too, Sarah. It's like a new beginning, I responded, smiling. And you deserve every bit of it. So, what's next for you? She asked, sipping her coffee. I've been thinking about that. I want to give back, maybe volunteer at the cancer center. Share my story, help others. I said, the idea resonating with me more and more. That's wonderful, Emily. You'll be amazing at it, she encouraged. After lunch, I went for a walk in the park. The sun was shining and the air was fresh. I took a moment to sit on a bench and just breathe. Life was precious, and I was here, living it. As I walked back home, my phone rang. It was my boss, Mr. Thompson. Emily, good news. The board has approved your proposal for the new project, he said. That's fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I won't let you down, I replied, excitement building up. I know you won't. Keep up the good work, he said, before ending the call. Back at home, I reflected on my journey. From the shock of my diagnosis to the betrayal and divorce, it had been a roller coaster of emotions. But here I was, standing tall. I decided to write a blog post, sharing my story with the world. As I typed, the words flowed effortlessly. It was a story of pain, resilience, and ultimately, triumph. When I hit publish, I felt a sense of liberation. My story was out there, and if it could inspire even one person, it was worth it. It was just a regular evening when I came home. The weight of the long day at work was still fresh, and my tired feet could feel every step as I climbed up to our small apartment on the third floor. The familiar scent of our home greeted me, and for a moment, I hoped for a quiet evening. But that hope was quickly shattered. As soon as I opened the door, I found Mark, my husband, lounging on the old brown couch. He had the remote in one hand and a half-empty beer in the other. The television was blaring some show or another, but Mark's focus shifted to me as soon as I stepped in. Betty, he started, not even greeting me, I want a pie tonight. I blinked in surprise. Mark, I just got back from work and I'm really tired. Can we have it tomorrow instead? He didn't look happy. You're home now, aren't you? So make a pie. It's not that hard. I sighed. I remember my mother always said to be understanding and accommodating. But sometimes it felt like it was always me doing the accommodating. Nevertheless, I headed to the kitchen, deciding that making a pie might be the quicker route to peace. The apartment wasn't big, just a single bedroom, a living area combined with a dining space, and a small kitchen. I quickly gathered the ingredients, hoping to finish the pie as soon as possible. As I was rolling out the dough, Mark strolled into the kitchen. "Make sure it's apple, and none of that store-bought crust stuff." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We had store-bought crust, but I knew better than to use it now. I made the pie from scratch, just like he wanted. It took me a good hour to prepare everything. The aroma of the baking pie filled the apartment, and for a moment, everything felt cozy and right. I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, this pie could be the start of a pleasant evening. But when the timer went off and I took the pie out, letting it cool on the counter, my hopes were dashed again. Mark was back in the kitchen, barely waiting for the pie to cool down before taking a big slice. After a few bites, his face contorted in displeasure. Without a word, he picked up the plate and threw the pie slice onto the floor, where it landed with a sad splat. "That was terrible," he spat out. I was stunned. All my efforts, all the care I put into that pie, and this was the reaction I got. Tears filled my eyes, but I tried to hold them back. "What was wrong with it?" I managed to ask. "Everything," he replied curtly. "You should know better." I didn't know what to say. I felt so small, so insignificant. The shattered pie on the floor seemed like a reflection of our relationship, broken and messy. Feeling defeated, I cleaned up the mess, the weight of years of unhappiness pressing down on me. It wasn't just about the pie, it was about everything. The lack of appreciation, the constant demands, the way Mark looked at me or didn't look at me. All of it. That night, I knew I needed a break. I couldn't stay in that apartment. I needed to be with someone who understood, someone who cared. That's why I turned to William, my brother. He had always been my rock. Grabbing my bag and leaving the mess behind, I decided to spend the night at his place. William's home was a cozy two-story building with a small garden in the front. I didn't even have to knock. He must have heard my car because he opened the door before I reached it, his face filled with concern. "Betty?" he started, pulling me into a comforting hug. "What happened?" Tears streamed down my face as I mumbled. "He threw the pie, Will. The pie I made after a long day at work. He just threw it on the floor." William led me inside, settling me on the soft couch in his living room. "Tell me everything," he urged, handing me a cup of hot tea. Sipping the warm drink, I began to recount the events of the evening. As I spoke, memories of the past also surfaced. "It wasn't just tonight, Will. It's been this way for years. I always thought things would change, that he would change. Remember when we first met at Jenna's party? He was so charming then." William nodded. "I remember. But Betty, people can put on a facade for a while, but their true colors always come out." "You know," I continued, "when we first got married, everything was great. We'd go on dates, laugh, talk for hours. But as the years went by, he changed, or maybe I just saw the real him." William's face tightened. "He didn't start off this way?" I shook my head. "No, we'd have our disagreements, but it was never like this. Over the years, he just became more demanding, more critical. I don't know when I started feeling like I was walking on eggshells around him." William sighed deeply. "You know, Mom and Dad had their issues, but Dad never treated Mom this way." "I know," I replied, tears forming again. "I thought I could change him, make him see how hurtful he was being. But no matter what I did, it was never good enough." William looked at me seriously. "Betty, love doesn't work that way. You can't change someone who doesn't see a problem in their actions." I looked down, taking another sip of my tea. I remember when Mom and Dad would argue, but Dad would always apologize, always make up for it. Mark never does. There was a pause. Then William said, "Betty, you deserve better. Remember when we were kids? We promised each other we'd always be there. I'm here for you now. You need to think about yourself, your happiness." I nodded, taking in his words. The realization was growing within me. This wasn't the life I envisioned for myself. I deserved respect, love, and care. And it was clear I wasn't going to get that from Mark. "You're right," I finally admitted. "I can't keep living like this. It's time to make a change." William squeezed my hand. "I'll be with you every step of the way." The morning light filtered through the curtains of William's guest room. I stretched, feeling more rested than I had in a long time. The decision to divorce Mark had brought with it a mixture of relief and apprehension. Walking downstairs, I found William already up, making breakfast in the kitchen. "Morning, sis," he greeted with a warm smile. "Good morning," I replied, pulling up a chair at the dining table. He placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of me. "You need to eat. Big day today." I nodded, taking a bite. "I'm nervous, Will, but it's the right thing to do." He sat across from me, sipping his coffee. "It's never easy, but remember, you're doing this for yourself, and I'm right here with you." After breakfast, William drove me to the lawyer's office. As we parked, I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the steps ahead. Inside, we were greeted by Mrs. Harris, a stern-looking woman with sharp eyes. But as she spoke, her kindness shone through. "Betty, I understand this is a difficult time for you. My job is to guide you through the legal process and make sure your interests are protected," she said. "Thank you," I whispered, feeling grateful for her support. The meeting was long, filled with paperwork and legalities. Mrs. Harris explained everything patiently, ensuring I understood my rights and the process ahead. As the days turned into weeks, life became a whirlwind of appointments, meetings, and paperwork. Mark, to my surprise, remained silent throughout this time. He neither signed the divorce papers nor contested them. He simply seemed to have disappeared. This silence was unsettling. One evening, while sitting with William in his living room, I expressed my concerns. "It's strange, Will. Mark hasn't reacted at all. No calls, no messages, nothing. It's like he's vanished." William looked thoughtful. "It is odd, especially given how he was earlier, but maybe he realized his mistakes and wants to move on." "I hope so," I sighed, though a nagging doubt lingered. Life continued its pace. I started looking for a new place to live. I wanted a fresh start, a home where I could rebuild my life without the shadows of the past. After a few weeks of searching, I found a beautiful house. It was spacious, with large windows letting in plenty of light, a stark contrast to the dim apartment I had shared with Mark. I felt a connection the moment I stepped in. This was my new beginning. William was ecstatic when he saw the place. "It's perfect for you, Betty, a place to call your own." As we toured the house, I shared my plans with him. "I want to paint the walls light blue, maybe have some plants by the windows." He chuckled. "Always the planner. It sounds wonderful." Moving in was a joyous occasion. With the help of William and a few friends, the house quickly started to feel like a home. Every evening, after work, I'd return to my sanctuary, relishing the peace it brought. However, that peace was short-lived. One fateful evening, as I returned home, I found the front door ajar. A chill ran down my spine. Pushing the door open, I stepped in cautiously. The sight that greeted me was unexpected and alarming. There, in the living room, sat Mark. My heart raced as I took in the scene before me. Mark sat at my dining table, his belongings scattered around. A sense of violation washed over me. This was my space, my sanctuary, and he had invaded it. "What are you doing here, Mark?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up, his face showing a mix of smugness and defiance. "Well, it's our house, isn't it? We're still married, Betty. But I bought this house after we separated. It has nothing to do with you," I shot back. Mark sneered, leaning back in the chair. "Doesn't matter. As your husband, I have every right to be here." Just then, Anna, my au pair, walked in, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Betty. He showed me his ID and marriage certificate. He said he had every right to be here. I didn't know what to do." I sighed. "It's okay, Anna. This isn't your fault." Turning my attention back to Mark, I said, "You need to leave, Mark. This is my home, not yours." Mark chuckled. "Think again, sweetheart. I'll be staying here. And if you try to kick me out, I'll make sure to claim half of everything in our divorce." The audacity of his claim left me reeling. I felt trapped, cornered in my own home. But I couldn't let him see my fear. I needed to be strong. "Fine," I said, trying to sound calm. "Stay tonight. But tomorrow, I'm getting a lawyer, and we'll see who has the right to be here." Mark smirked. "Bring it on. I'm not going anywhere." Feeling defeated, I retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I needed to think, to come up with a plan. Grabbing my phone, I called William. "Will," I said, tears forming. "He's here, at the house. He says he has a right to it." William's voice was filled with anger and concern. "Stay calm, Betty. I'm on my way. We'll sort this out." Hanging up, I tried to calm my racing heart. Mark's sudden reappearance and bold claims had taken me by surprise. But with William by my side, I felt a glimmer of hope. Within minutes, William arrived. I heard the two of them talking in hushed tones downstairs. The tension in the air was palpable. After what felt like an eternity, William came up to my room. "Betty," he began, his face serious, "there's something you need to know. When we bought this house, I made sure it was in my name. I had a feeling Mark might pull something like this. Legally, he has no claim to this property." A wave of relief washed over me. "Thank you, Will. I don't know what I would do without you." He hugged me. "We're family. We look out for each other." The next morning, armed with the property papers and William's unwavering support, I confronted Mark. Seeing the documents, he realized he had no ground to stand on. His smugness from the night before had disappeared. "This isn't over, Betty," he hissed as he left. Days turned into weeks. With every passing day, the intrusion by Mark felt more like a distant memory, but the threat he posed remained. William and I, however, weren't about to sit idly by. One evening, as we sat in the living room, William looked at me with a seriousness I had seldom seen. "Betty, I've been thinking. We need to be prepared for any moves Mark might make. He's unpredictable." I nodded. "I've been feeling the same. But what can we do?" William paused, taking a deep breath. "I've hired a private detective. I wanted to know what Mark's been up to since the two of you separated." I looked at him in shock. "A private detective? Will, is that necessary?" William sighed. "I just have this gut feeling. I want to make sure we have all our bases covered." I understood William's concerns. His protective nature was one of the things I cherished most about him. "All right," I conceded. "What did the detective find?" William pulled out a folder from his bag. As he spread the photos and documents on the table, my heart sank. The pictures showed Mark with various women. Some looked familiar from our past life. One document caught my eye, a police report filed by a woman against Mark. He did this?" I whispered, disbelief evident in my voice. William nodded gravely. "It appears Mark's activities haven't been on the straight and narrow. This could be our leverage. If he tries to make any more moves against you, we can use this against him." I felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal. I can't believe he sunk this low. William put a reassuring hand on mine. "We'll get through this, Betty, together." A few days later, our preparation proved to be fortuitous. A letter arrived from Mark's attorney, making wild claims and threats about taking me to court for supposed shared assets and conjuring up fabricated tales about our life together. Reading the letter, my hands shook. But William, ever the pillar of strength, looked at me and said, "We're ready for this, Betty. We've got evidence. He can't intimidate us." With William's support, we met with Mrs. Harris again. As she read through the letter and went over the evidence we had against Mark, her face remained unreadable. After a long pause, she finally said, "We have a strong case here. Mark's claims are baseless, especially with the evidence we have. We'll counter this. Don't worry." Relief washed over me, but the idea of facing Mark in court was still daunting. William, sensing my anxiety, squeezed my hand. "We've got this. I won't let him hurt you anymore." The countermove was set in motion. Mrs. Harris swiftly drafted a response, highlighting Mark's activities and questioning the credibility of his claims. The ball was now in Mark's court. Every day after that was a game of wait and watch. William and I spent many evenings going over the possibilities, preparing for any scenario. Through it all, William's unwavering support gave me the strength to face each day. It was a rainy Tuesday evening. William and I were watching a movie when the knock echoed through the house. With a look of mutual surprise, I went to open the door. Standing there was a woman, soaked to the bone, her eyes red from crying. "Are you Betty?" she asked, her voice shaky. I nodded cautiously. "Yes, who are you?" She took a deep breath. "My name is Jenna. I was involved with Mark." My heart skipped a beat. "Come in," I said, motioning for her to enter. Once seated, Jenna began her story. "I met Mark a few months ago. At first, he seemed charming, but soon he started showing his true colors. I heard about you, about his past, and I thought I should come and warn you." "Warn me?" I thought. What could be worse than what I already knew? Jenna continued, tears streaming down her face. "He became aggressive, possessive. He said things about you, about how you'd ruined his life, and he wanted revenge." William's face darkened. "What kind of revenge?" Jenna hesitated, looking down. "He talked about ruining you financially, said he had friends who could make it happen." The room was silent for a few minutes, the gravity of Jenna's words sinking in. Finally, William broke the silence. "We need to do something about this. We can't let him continue to terrorize people." I nodded in agreement, feeling a newfound determination. We need to expose him, let everyone know who he really is. Over the next few weeks, with Jenna's help, William and I gathered more evidence against Mark. From his financial misdeeds to his numerous affairs, the depth of his deceit became apparent. It wasn't just me he had hurt. There were others, just like Jenna. With everything we had, William suggested we go to the police. It's time he faces the consequences of his actions. Walking into the police station, I felt a mix of fear and hope. Would they believe us? Would they take action? Detective Rogers was assigned to our case. As we laid out our evidence, he listened intently, occasionally asking questions. Finally, after what felt like hours, he spoke. "This is substantial evidence. We'll investigate further, but from what you've shown, it's clear that Mark has been involved in illegal activities." The next few days were a blur. The police acted swiftly, arresting Mark on multiple charges. The news spread, and soon, the monster I had once called my husband was unmasked to the world. Months passed after the revelation. With Mark behind bars, I should have felt safer. And while there was certainly a sense of relief, there was also the constant fear of what Mark's friends might do, those he had often bragged about, who he said would always have his back. One day, as I was returning from work, I noticed something odd. My mail was scattered all over the porch, and the front door looked like someone tried to tamper with it. Panic surged. Could this be one of Mark's allies? I immediately called William. "Will, I think someone tried to break in." "Stay calm," he replied, his voice firm. "I'll be right over." I waited inside my car until William arrived. Surveying the scene, he confirmed my suspicions. "It looks like an attempted break-in. We need to beef up your security." Over the next few days, William and I worked on improving the safety of the house, installing security cameras and an advanced alarm system. One evening, as we were testing the systems, the alarm suddenly blared. Rushing to the monitor, we saw a man skulking around the property. But before he could make any moves, the local police, alerted by the security company, arrived and apprehended him. I felt a rush of gratitude towards William. His foresight had prevented another potential disaster. The next day, Detective Rogers called. "Betty, we've got the intruder in custody. He claims he was sent by Mark, but we're still confirming the details." This confirmed my worst fears. Mark was still trying to control and hurt me, even from jail. Days later, I got a call from Jenna. "Betty, there's something you should know." She hesitated before speaking. "Mark's been reaching out to people from prison. He's been trying to spread lies about you." I gritted my teeth. "Thank you, Jenna. He won't get away with this." That evening, William had an idea. "Betty, we need to turn the tables. We've got evidence, Jenna's testimony, and a lot more. Let's go public." The next week, with the help of William's contacts, We scheduled a press conference. The media turnout was massive, with numerous reporters eager to hear my side of the story. As I stepped up to the podium, my heart pounded. Hello, everyone. Today, I want to share my story, not just to expose Mark's cruelty, but to give hope to all those who've been in abusive relationships. I detailed everything, from our first meeting to the pie incident, to Jenna's revelations and the attempted break-in. As I spoke, the room was silent, every eye focused on me. When I finished, the questions began. Do you believe Mark is still a threat? I replied confidently. Yes, but I won't let him or anyone else intimidate me any longer. Another reporter asked, How do you feel about him now? I paused for a moment. I pity him. For someone to have so much hate, he must be truly miserable. After the press conference, the support was overwhelming. Messages poured in from all over, many from women sharing their own experiences. It was clear that by speaking out, I had ignited a movement. That evening, as I sat with William, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Thank you, Will. Today, I took back my power. William smiled warmly. You always had it, Betty. You just needed a little push. The next morning, William dropped by. Got some news, he said, a glint in his eyes. Remember the intruder? I nodded, recalling the fear of that night. How could I forget? Well, he began, the court has sentenced him, and with all the evidence stacked against him, he'll be locked up for a long time. Relief washed over me. That's good to hear. And there's more, he continued. Mark's been transferred to a high-security prison. With his recent antics and connections, he won't be coming out anytime soon. I hugged William tightly. Thank you for everything, for being there when I felt alone. William smiled. Family sticks together. Weeks turned into months, and life started to regain its rhythm. I reconnected with friends, started a support group for victims of abuse, and even began dating again. On my birthday, I held a small get-together. As I looked around at the faces, William, Jenna, my new friends, and old ones, I realized how far I had come. The wounds of the past were healing, replaced by the joy of new memories. Late into the night, as everyone left, William sat down next to me. You've done well, Betty. I looked at him, tears glistening. With a little help from my friends. He chuckled. Always.